So the staff, when they rename themselves, are the possibilities limitless, or what are the restrictions there?
No Bugs Bunny?
Excuse me, Mayor Saunderson, you're live.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. All right, Council, it is 5 o'clock, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. Today, we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe and Ottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. And I will look to the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for December 2nd, 2020 be adopted as amended. And the added item is item 5.1, Town of Collingwood 2021 Draft Budget Attachment. Seeing no questions or comments or amendments, I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously, and reminds me I have to get my cards. I will look to council. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? All right, seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we progress, please let us know. We have everyone here. Councillor Madigan will be joining us in progress. What I'm going to just advise council that and the public that tonight's meeting, we're going through a fairly lengthy budget presentation. We are having one deputation, and following the deputation, I will ask the public if there are any members that would like to comment on the budget materials that have been released to date. And then we will, council will receive the budget presentation. I will allow council to ask questions after each department has spoken. And then following the full presentation, I will then ask the public if anyone would like to comment on the budget presentation. Just so, because there's quite a broad amount of material that we're going to be covering. So we'll allow the public an opportunity at the outset and then after the full presentation. So with that being said, we have a deputation today. It's item 4.1, and it is funding of a climate specialist coordinator. And we have Laurel Hood and Bruce Clark on behalf of the Collingwood Climate Action Team. Sarah, can you please let Laurel and Bruce in for us? Hello, and so how are you?
Good.
Good. Is Bruce, Mr. Clark, joining you today?
Yes, he is, but I can get started. And
he's here. I've heard him. Can we? Yes. Bruce, do you have video as well?
Whoops! It's let me start the video.
Okay, there you are. I have both of you. So you have 10 minutes, and I will pass the floor to both of you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to start. Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm speaking on behalf of the Collingwood Climate Action Team. It is our position that the climate specialist position should be funded in this year's budget. About a year and a half ago, I retired from teaching and began reading about the climate crisis. I thought I knew what I was talking about, but I soon realized I had no idea. At times, I feel incredible optimism knowing that practical solutions to this problem already exist and are already being implemented in many places. On the other hand, there are times where I feel incredible despair knowing that the clock is running down and it seems that instead of digging out, we keep digging deeper. Every month that passes makes the hill we need to climb steeper, and our efforts to mitigate and adapt increasingly unlikely to succeed. The climate crisis poses great risks to our community, but the flip side of this is that there are also opportunities that we can and should seize upon. If we proceed correctly, we can address the climate crisis while also rectifying social injustice and inequity and promoting health and prosperity. The Collingwood Climate Action Team is keenly aware that budgets are tight and that funding a climate specialist position is a difficult proposition. But doing so, and doing so now, makes financial sense. A climate specialist looking at appropriate climate action for our town has the potential to create new sources of revenue. For example, through a Canada Infrastructure Grant of $2.7 million, Lumsden, Saskatchewan, a town of only 1,800 people, installed solar panels that will completely pay for the operation of their recycling center. Heat, lights, recycle compactor, and electronics, 78,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Closer to home, Kitchener, Ontario, has been installing solar panels that in the first half of 2020 provided more than $100,000 in revenue for the city, almost 44,000 more than they anticipated. There are funding programs for zero emissions transit, clean power, building retrofits, broadband, and agriculture through the Canada Infrastructure Bank. All indications are that there will continue to be more announcements throughout the year. Already announced is the Ontario Resilience Infrastructure Stream that could fund all or most of our current active transportation plan. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Municipal Fund has millions of dollars of funding for wastewater management, sustainable affordable housing, and building retrofits, waiting for applications. People are ready for this change. In the summer of 2019, Seth Klein, a professor of urban studies at Simon Fraser University, commissioned a national poll to be completed by Abacus. Here are some of his main takeaways. 62% of the people think climate change is an emergency now or will become one in the next several years. 81% of the people polled thought that we should be moving to 100% renewable energy, or that we should be shifting in that direction even if 100% was not possible. Remarkably, even in Alberta, 75% of the respondents were in one of those two categories. Support for an energy transition increased even further if equality, poverty, economic insecurity, and job creation were going to be addressed in the process. In fact, the studies showed that the public is ahead of politicians. The good news for Collingwood is that across Canada, municipalities are where 80% of people reside, making it the level of government that has the most impact on climate and the biggest opportunity to address the crisis. Collingwood can make a difference and should do so effectively and swiftly. Collingwood is making changes. A climate specialist will help Collingwood to prioritize the actions that will have the greatest impact on reducing carbon emissions. Let me give you a quick example. Most municipalities, school boards, hospitals, and individuals have been well-meaning and tried to save energy by switching to LED light bulbs. These energy-efficient light sources use less electricity because they produce far less waste heat. Waste heat is a source of space heat within a building. When the waste heat from a light source is replaced with natural gas, which is high carbon, this leads to an overall increase in carbon emissions. This decade, Collingwood needs a laser focus on reducing carbon. That is what a climate specialist can do. It is our hope that hiring a climate specialist will scale up the rate of change so that 50% carbon reduction by 2030 is in reach. There are only 9 short years left until 2030. I think Bruce has some comments.
If I have any time left.
Bruce, you've got 4 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Local governments are on the front line of flooding and other climate extremes which are threatening our families, our businesses, our town. Local governments are also on the front lines of delivering climate solutions to safeguard people and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. FCM and the Insurance Bureau of Canada released a report in February of this year titled Investing in Canada's Future: The Cost of Climate Adaptation at the Local Level. The report provides new data showing the urgent need for new investments in local climate adaptations and where that investment is needed most. Studies have shown that investment in resilient infrastructure have a return on investment of $6 in future averted losses for every $1 spent proactively. These investments are critical, and we believe that Collingwood needs a specialist to help guide the difficult decisions that lie ahead. Collingwood has the possibility of accessing the Green Municipal Fund for building retrofits, fleet upgrades, natural climate solutions, and more. FCM estimates that local communities are influencing 50% of all greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, scaling up local actions is key to getting to net zero by 2050. A climate specialist could locate possible sources of funding, complete applications for funding in what will be a very competitive environment, make recommendations to all departments and to council how to allocate any funding in the most effective ways, and help keep all of us on track to make a plan consistent with Council's climate crisis declaration of last year. We are pleased to see that the draft budget recognizes the importance of a climate specialist. We want to acknowledge and thank the work being done by all town staff and by council. The Collingwood Climate Action Team looks forward to continue to support the work of council and the town staff to work towards the 2030 greenhouse gas reduction targets. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to address it.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Laurel. You're in 8.5 minutes. Thank you very much for that succinct and informative presentation. Council, are there any questions for our presenters? Seeing none, thank you very much to both of you. And we've made due notes of those important facts. So we will be considering all that you have just said in the upcoming budget deliberations. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 5.1, which is the budget materials. And as I indicated at the outset, before staff start the presentation, I'm going to allow the public an opportunity to speak about the budget presentation materials that have been released. If they have any comments or questions about the items that have been released so far, then we will start the presentation, and I will allow an opportunity once it's entirely complete for the public to make comments or ask questions. So, Sarah, is there anyone who would like to speak at this point?
Thank you, Your Worship. We currently only have computer participants, so please press the raise your hand feature if you wish to speak. And we do have Mr. Matthew Priddy would like to address the committee.
Okay, put him through, please.
Yeah, hello?
Hi, Matthew.
Hi there.
Matthew.
Yeah,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. We got a bit of a reverb there. I don't know if you have your computer on. Maybe you could turn that down. So do you have comments or questions, Matt, about the budget materials that have been posted online?
I have one question. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, here we go. My question is, with this Theatre Arts Center, what is the best location that the town would like to have that? Harborview Park, the Leisure Time Center, Millennium Park. Have they thought about what the location might be for that kind of project? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I know that the study is in the budget, but I'm not sure if we've got any locations. Dean and Director Culver, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. We're just about to hopefully launch the feasibility assessment. One of the things that it will be studying is if it's feasible, and if feasible, where. So the location has not been anywhere predetermined.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Matt, did that answer your question? He did, and he's left. So Sarah, does the other attendee want to speak?
Again, if there's anybody participating in this meeting, please press the raise your hand feature if you wish to address the committee this evening. And it does not look like there's anyone wishing to speak at this point. Okay.
So we've got Treasurer Switzer and CEO Skinner. So I will pass it off. And I think, Sonia, you're going to make some introductory comments, and then Mike will take us through the presentation. So I'll pass it over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have a number of speakers tonight, kicking it off with the Treasurer Switzer. And I think this is one of the most exciting days of the year for me, which is the budget presentation day. And without giving too much away, another few dollars and council would be directing over 100 million of funds toward projects and positive changes in the community. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to Treasurer Switzer to kick off the first few slides, which have been provided to the public and also to council.
Thank you, Sonia. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, CEO Skinner and Your Worship. Would we be able to get the slideshow? Okay. Good evening, members of the committee, staff, and members of the public. A municipal budget is a policy and planning document that outlines the municipality's priorities and is a balancing act between often competing priorities. What level of service is required to meet community expectations balanced against realistic taxation and user fee levels? Every time your street is plowed, you visit a park or arena or take the bus, you are witnessing your tax dollars at work. To keep Collingwood both affordable and prosperous, staff need to determine how best to deliver programs, services, facilities, and infrastructure while balancing revenues and expenditures. This is especially difficult this year due to the unprecedented impact of COVID-19. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide the Strategic Initiatives Committee and the public with an overview of the proposed draft budget for 2021. Provide background information for a public and SIC input meeting on December 9th, as well as to enable questions and comments to ensure that the proposed scenario is well understood by the committee and the public. Next slide, please. So to provide context to the budget scenario being presented, the following slides will provide information on the population and household growth in Collingwood. The line chart that you see before you is the estimated growth in households and the estimated population growth. Based on MPAC household count figures, we have added approximately 1,760 households between 2014 and 2020. The in-year increase in households for 2021 assessment year is sitting currently at 453. This reflects only the increase in the number of households that MPAC has assessed and included on the tax roll up to November 16, 2020. The estimated growth in population is 6,200 persons, or a 29% increase since 2014. This translates into a 29% increase in the use of roads, sewers, water, parks, recreation facilities, etc. With the exception of the addition of the water department staff in 2016 and the replacement of contracted IT services with in-house staffing, staff equivalents have increased approximately 29.95, that's an FTE or full-time equivalent figure since 2014, or 13%. The majority of these increases occurred in 2018 and 2019 with approximately 19 full-time equivalent positions. If the proposed staffing needs are approved in this scenario for 2021, staffing equivalents would increase roughly 8.32 or 3.6%. Department heads, as they progress through their business plans, will provide council with the impacts of growth versus their ability to keep up with the demands that it brings to their departmental presentations. In either case, staffing levels are not keeping pace with the population growth. Next slide, please. And this again is just providing context. You can see that our estimated population for 2021, and again, they're all estimates since 2016, which was the last census, but we're estimating the population in 2021 to be roughly 26,000. Next slide, please. So how are municipal taxes calculated? The municipal property tax levy is the money that must be raised through taxes to meet the needs of the town. The property tax levy is determined by multiplying the assessed value of your property, and this assessed value is received from the provincial and arm's length Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, or MPAC. So your property's assessment multiplied by the applicable tax rate, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, etc., will determine the property tax levy. The town's property tax levy continues to include the capital levy as well. Next slide, please. This overview shows the total amount of expenditure within the proposed budget, considering funds from all sources, so funding from all sources. So this is the levy that will be raised in 2021, and we've provided the 2018, 2019, and 2020 levies that were raised in those respective years. The total amounts may vary year to year if there are large capital projects planned or other significant changes. Next slide, please. The scenario presented in the proposed budget conforms to the scenario endorsed by Council in September, which stated that staff develop a budget scenario where the 2021 tax rate is held at the 2020 tax rate level, and that the operating portion of the budget be capped at 2% above the 2020 operating budget, with any excess being budgeted to capital asset renewal projects and depleted reserves and reserves. With the scenario presented in this proposed budget, property owners will experience no increase in their total dollars of municipal tax paid, compared to 2020. This is a result of the town holding its tax rate at the 2020 rate of 0.705425%, and MPAC postponing the 2020 assessment update, which would have impacted property assessments in the 2021 taxation year. The proposed budget caps the use of the tax levy at 2% over last year's levy, which equals $34,611,689. As development growth has occurred and the assessment base has grown approximately 3.68% in 2021 per MTE, there is additional tax levy revenue, even though we're holding the tax rate at the 2020 rate. Given that the assessment base has grown more than the 2% cap, there is roughly $570,000 more available above the scenario that's proposed in this budget. Next slide, please. Along with the tax levy revenue, the town also has several additional funding sources that contribute to funding the town's total expenditure. These include payments in lieu of taxes, grants or government transfers, non-tax income such as user rates, user fees, and fines, investment income, development charges, as well as funding from the town's existing reserve and reserve fund. Next slide, please. This overview shows the total amount of expenditure within the proposed budget. considering funding from all sources. So what we can see here is these are the total expenditures or budget expenditures that are included within this proposed budget. 61.3 million for operating, 38 million for capital, to a combined total of 99.3 million for the 2021 proposed budget. Next slide, please. And I'll pass this over to CAO Skinner to speak to the priorities that are addressed in this budget.
Thank you, Treasurer Switzer, and I'm quite pleased to say that Collingwood continues to, in my words, to punch somewhat above its weight with respect to the services that we deliver. And I think that this budget does what Council's directed us to do, which is to make sure that we work toward our vision that people thrive here and to live more now. And despite a number of challenges, including COVID and decreased interest on our funds, increasing costs for things like insurance, and all of our town services are proposed to continue at the same or increased levels of service. And I think that the highest council priorities are acted upon within this 2% cap. And many of the directors and managers who will speak briefly to their divisions following will mention these, but I thought it was worth highlighting that the things you've been talking about, the things that the residents and businesses have asked us to do are intended to be delivered within the next year of 2021. Things like the judicial inquiry follow-up, so that's following up from the recommendations in the report. An RFP for the redevelopment or next steps on the grain terminals, decisions on the asset sale proceeds, the official plan completion and submission of that to the county, and the kickoff of the next step, which is to update our zoning provisions, a continuation of accessible transit, a number of PRC, Parks, Recreation and Culture, large projects such as the Fisher Field Fieldhouse, our new splash pad, and more. Some capacity that will help us with much needed services for folks who want to develop in town and bylaw. Continuing with our Habitat in Towns collaboration with the UN, and a number of other things that are noted here. So please rest assured that as you go through and you get your many slides, that I believe that within the foundation of what's being presented to you and the numbers that our Treasurer Switzer just went over, you and the town will receive your highest priority, fund your highest priorities for delivery. And I think I will go back to Treasurer Switzer now, please.
Next slide, please, and thank you, CAO Skinner. Also, I've just been speaking with our IT manager. If my voice is cutting out, please let me know. I want to make sure that everyone can hear the presentation as I go through. So this next chart provides the proposed funding by budget component. As you can see, the chart provides the breakdown of taxation funding compared to other funding that each respective department receives. The 4 departments up at the top are the 4 non-tax supported departments: wastewater, water, parking, and building. And below are the tax supported departments, and you can see the blue is the portion of that department that is funded from taxation. And with the red, the portion of that department's expenditures that are funded from other sources of revenue. Corporate management, down at the very bottom, we just have a note that it includes additional reserve fund, the additional reserve fund transfer of $630,246. Next slide, please.
Mike, you are continuing to cut in and out. I don't know if you can adjust your microphone.
Okay, just bear with me for a moment.
While he's doing that, I would just note on the previous slide, the corporate management account also includes our debt servicing, most of our debt servicing. So it's not a whole lot of people sitting in town hall that add up to that largest expenditure line at the bottom of the slide.
Mike, you're muted.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I was actually just testing my my microphone and didn't want to be speaking to everybody. I'm as far as I'm getting with the microphone test, it's coming back to me.
Okay.
Again, if it persists, perhaps I can speak with IT about getting a headphone set up so I'm not cutting out. So I'll have to continue on with the presentation. But if it gets to the point where it's very bad, I'll see if IT can bring over a headset so I can get that set up, potentially on a break. Okay. So this slide provides a high-level overview of the proposed budget by department. And am I still, Sonia, am I still cutting out?
You're a little bit better than previously, so I think if you continue, otherwise I can take over just for the rest of the intro.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind going through the rest of the intro, and I will run and get a headset. And then once I have that set up, I will continue.
Okay, thank you, Treasurer Switzer. I will take over the next. So on this slide that's showing is the proposed tax levy by department. So this is just a summary of by the departments compared to last year, where we are with respect to the overall proposed budget and the percent changes. And as we go through, you'll see why some of these percent changes happen. For example, in protective inspection and control, we have a large difference there, but we were looking at, for example, adding the bylaw supervisor in that position. So those will be expended as we go through. And on the next slide, it also shows the exact same expenditures, but just with a different categorization. We also have provided you in the overall budget book with the proposed budget by expense category. So as you go through each of the business plans within the proposed budget, they all have the same headings. And the same headings that they all have are the ones shown on this slide here. So for example, everyone has salaries and benefits, everyone has administrative expenses. And you'll see, for example, for salaries and benefits, we've gone up 1.695 as the change. And that's shown at 8%, whereas administrative expenses, we've endeavored to make some efficiencies and thus have pushed those down about 6%. But overall, the total there is shown from the operating side at about a 2% change. Finally, we're going to ask each of the directors and/or managers, as is appropriate, to very briefly give you an overview of their department. Since this is our third time through the budget in this council term, we're not going to spend time talking about what each of the departments do, but we are going to talk about the unavoidable changes, the discretionary growth-driven changes, and the discretionary service enhancement changes. And by discretionary, what that means is that council can choose to put those in place, or in fact not to put those in place. And there's about 29 sections being provided, so this will be a pretty quick run through. We just wanted to make sure that all the numbers were on the table, and that tonight council, and at the end of all of these presentations, the public will have had a chance to ask any questions that you would like to ask to make sure that you understand the proposal. And if you would like to make some suggestions, we can also receive those tonight as well. It was not our expectation that council would provide any motion or resolution this evening with respect to what is being proposed to you. But that next week on the 9th of December, that we would have a summary of the online public input that would have been received by that date. as well as any comments received in the interim. And on that evening, would be asking council to provide direction on what you would like in the final budget, what you would like prepared in the final budget. So without further ado, I'm going to open it up to the first section, which is governance. And I believe before I do that, actually, I think that there's a question potentially for the chair.
Okay. Councillor Jeffrey, you had your card up.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I was just wondering if we could just ask a couple of questions of the overall summary information together, not specific to department.
Sure, go ahead.
I was curious in the listing of the whopping $60,000 that council has to spend on that list of items. Why the art and culture feasibility study would appear on that list when it, and there's might be other things too, when it's specifically council direction at this point, and we've already referred to it this evening already. So that can be answered now or later. I just would be interested in hearing some commentary on staff's ability with a lot of the software purchases and streamlining of the operations, on how that's helping staff save time. And I would also be interested in knowing where the impact of the restart funds for the emergency operating were felt in the comparison between 2021 and what happens with the phase 2 funds from that. So now or later, but those are just the questions I accumulated overall, not specific to a department. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will look to CAO Skinner. Do you want to answer those now, or is it going to do as we go through?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey, I wouldn't mind answering the first one with respect to the arts and culture feasibility study. And in conversation with Treasurer Switzer and Executive Director Culver, that project has actually just in the final throes of being awarded. And what we were intending to do, and we just realized this, or put this plan in place in the last couple of days, was to potentially formally ask council to take the funding that had been collected for that project in 2020 and move it into a reserve so that it could be pulled out again in 2021. And the net effect of that, unless the treasurer tells me I'm not expressing this correctly, would be that we would not need to use new money in 2021 for that project. So we had intended to provide you with a brief update on that during the budget session coming up, but that essentially would be the story there. I would like to take away the questions about the software and how it's helping to save time, and the restart funds for emergency operating, so that we can reply. But I would say we are having some great success with the software, and the restart funds have been essential in 2020, and we are hoping that there'll be more available in 2021. You'll see within the proposal that there are some things we're proposing to take from the asset funds that we would prefer and would most appropriately fit in something like an extension of the restart fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Does that assist, Councillor Jeffrey?
That does. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson.
Good. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments before we go on to a department by department? Okay, seeing none, then I will pass it over to governance. Is that Clerk Gomes? Are you bringing this forward?
Yes, Your Worship, I am.
Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
All right, Stephanie, if you want to go to the next slide. So the first department you're looking at is positive. It's a decrease in 3%. So basically, we have a decrease in this budget over 2020 of 18,000, and that's largely due to the amount that we do put in reserve for elections. We estimate for the election in 2022, 80,000, and we normally put annual amounts in reserve. and we are at that amount right now, so we're not requiring that additional transfer. So even with the addition of the cost of living increases to the salary and benefits, and that required within this budget, we do show a decrease this year. So next slide. So even though we have a decrease in the amount that does go to reserve, we are required to spend some money on elections in the year 2021, and that goes towards our alternative voting method that council will be making recommendations on, as we are required to retain that service provider if there is one required, as well as we maintain DataFix as our voter list management server, so that does require some cost. And we have kept in the base budget the grants and donations that are provided through council, and I believe that's right now at $75,000 for the Out of the Cold program. I believe there's $10,000 that go towards the art, and then there's $20,000 that is uncommitted for that. Next slide. Perfect. I think there might have been a slide missing, or maybe it was deleted, but just an overview of that department was basically a review of what the governance portfolio includes. So again, that's all council's expenses, and the election expenses are included in that. So sorry, next slide, Stephanie.
Okay, in the Office of the CAO, you could go to the next slide. And this one doesn't change. The head count is 1. And if we could go to the next slide. Within the capabilities of my department and within the department itself, with some help from the executive assistant, we have a number of projects that will be delivered, including the UN Habitat Urban Economy Forum, Collingwood Conference, and leadership for the pilot projects. We have assumed we would advocate to raise the cap on the number of physicians in Collingwood, that we would provide that leadership here, implement an operational planning approach, the asset sales I've mentioned. We've talked about enhancing our alignment with Simcoe County at the staffing level to make sure that we were in lockstep with them, and in fact leveraging what we could from the county's activities in Collingwood, support council in responding to the judicial inquiry, and also seeking to collaborate further across South Georgian Bay. Thank you.
So it's me up again. Thanks, Stephanie. So next slide. So this year, through your worship to the committee, you'll note that we have separated the corporate administration functions. So for the clerk services, we don't have a comparable for 2020. So this will be the baseline moving forward. We are not requesting any additional staffing. We're not requesting additional funds at this point. And so our proposed budget for 2021 is the total levy requirement is just over $1 million. Next slide. So these are some of the priorities that clerk services are going to be looking at, as indicated by CAO Skinner. The JI report implementation, Clerk's Department will be assisting that through our Office of Accountability, as well as other departments. So that is a priority for clerk services next year, as well as we're looking at a number of procurement updates and policy development. And ironically, this was a big scope too of the JI implementation. So I think those will both be considered at the same time. Obviously, our election preparedness that I talked about during the governance budget, records management. We're looking at doing some increased efficiency changes. This year we have moved towards a number of our documents and information being on SharePoint. So we are looking at how that will also assist with the records management program, ensuring that records are easily accessible. That also goes to support our Freedom of Information program that we provide under NFIPA. The BA BIA governance and support, as authorized by council in 2020. We will continue to support the BIA as they move into their next year. Review and update codes of conduct for council and staff. So this is something that we had already started working on. We kind of put on hold until the JI recommendations had come out. We'll also be working with the staff code of conduct. Currently, we have a code of ethics that are within the HR policy. So we will be working together with staff and the Human Resource Department on that aspect of it, as well as the outstanding items that we're managing for the town's social housing assets and interests. And then further engaging youth in governance, as this was a priority in the community-based strategic plan. We feel that this year we'd like to work on further enhancing those opportunities for our youth.
Oh, through your worship, I'm hoping everyone can hear me now. Perfect. So next slide, please. So as Sarah mentioned, the finance-related revenues and expenditures have been broken out from corporate management for the first time. And as a result, there are no comparable figures for the prior year budget. As you can see, the total levy requirement for the finance department for the 2021 proposed budget is just over 1.5 million. And the majority of this relates to salaries and benefits and annual support for various software licenses. Next slide, please. Some of the priorities and changes that we're looking at in the finance department is first the asset management plan, and it relates to consulting for the asset management plan. This consulting is going to assist the town with development of the asset management plan model for core assets, which is due July 1st, 2021. And this budget amount of 40,000 is going to be funded from the OSIF reserve fund. Next is the automation of the budget book. Finance would like to automate the budget book. Currently, the budget book is prepared in Word, and we use Excel to generate some of the numbers, but it's a very manual process. Similar to what we did with the town's annual financial statements, we would like to leverage some existing software that are you getting feedback, Mayor Saunderson?
No, I'm not getting feedback.
Excuse me. So what we'd like to do is automate the budget book with some existing software that we have. And what this will do is allow us to link this automated budget book with the budgeting software that we have, which will increase the efficiency in generating the budget book, as well as reduce any errors or typos or those sort of things. And this $15,000 for this consulting would be funded from the Modernization Reserve Fund. Following that is the implementation of budgeting software. In 2020, Finance completed the RFP with the successful bid being Questica. Due to time constraints, the implementation was deferred to 2021. So one of the first things Finance will be tackling in 2021 will be implementing this solution, which will create efficiencies with the budget process. And this cost has been included within the base budget. The DC update for community benefits is a priority in 2021 because of recent legislative changes to the Development Charge Act, as well as the Planning Act. These changes require the town to engage a consultant to update the Townwide Development Charges Act and to conduct a community benefits charges strategy and develop a related bylaw. The cost of this ask, which is budgeted for 48,000, would be funded from development charges. And some other items that we're looking are priorities in 2021 for finance is launching the virtual city hall. This is essentially completed at this point, and we intend to launch in early 2021. Next slide, please. Continuing with items covered in the base budget is internal staff training and business process reengineering. It's important that we continually work towards developing efficiencies within finance processes, as well as having sufficient cross-training for critical positions in the finance department, such as payroll, tax collection, and AP and AR. Water and wastewater billing, we are going to be investigating that being brought in-house in 2021 in order to provide ratepayers with a one-stop shop for their municipal services, so taxes, water and wastewater billing. And costs for this are included in the capital budget. And finally, in addition, the town will continue to develop WorkTech, and the next phase relates to fixed assets. This is currently done in rather large Excel workbooks. So this fixed assets module of WorkTech will streamline the capital asset tracking and reporting process. And the costs related to this are within the capital budget. Thank you. Oh, and that's still me. So corporate overhead, as I mentioned, we have broken out the Office of the CAO, clerks and finance, and the related revenues and expenses that we could identify that specifically relate to those functions into their own separate departments, or sub-departments, I should say. Next slide, please. But there are a number of items that sit still within corporate management that cannot be moved to one of those specific departments that I mentioned. So corporate management overhead includes all of the revenues and expenses that I mentioned that cannot be allocated. And the total request for this department in 2021 is just under 3.5 million. Major requests here include the transfer to capital for renovations of the Public Works building at 103,000. And actually, next slide, please. Got a little ahead of myself. As I was saying, funding for capital projects, the Public Works building and shop renovations, that's coming from taxes at 103,200, and office and shop improvements at 507 10th line for 80,000. In the surface enhancement, currently in this proposed budget, there's an additional transfer to reserve and reserve funds of 630,000. Which ties in with the scenario that we discussed earlier on in the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Council, are there any questions or comments on the corporate budget numbers that we just heard? Not seeing any, then I will pass it back to you, Mike. Go ahead.
Oh, hello. Sorry, maybe you can't
I
see
didn't
me,
see
Mayor
on
Saunderson.
Councilor,
Okay, sorry.
go ahead.
I know it's hard with the grid. Yes, please. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to Treasurer Switzer. I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying correctly. You were talking about the preparation of the budget. And so I'm thinking about our just shy of $100 million budget. And were you saying that this is prepared using Excel and Word versus like you need some budgeting software? Is that correct?
Go ahead, Mike.
Through your worship, thank you. We currently do not utilize a budgeting software. In 2020, we went out to market through the proper procurement process to obtain a formal budgeting software, but due to time constraints, we weren't able to implement that in 2020. We plan on implementing that formal budgeting software, which is called Questica, in 2021, and that ideally is going to streamline the budgeting process further. We do utilize our current ERP system, which is Diamond Great Plains, in order to provide reports to departments, as well as generate the reports that we use to populate the figures that you see within the budget document. But the actual budget book itself is prepared in Word. And there's some opportunities out there with technology to really streamline that document preparation.
I would imagine so. Okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you for clarifying.
Council, any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, then I'll pass it back to you, Mike. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I will actually pass this on to Executive Director Culver to go through customer and corporate service administration.
Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, excuse me, my apologies. I'm having some internet connectivity issues, so if I have, I'm trying to offend. So we can head over to the first slide, Stephanie. So you'll see a small increase overall in the customer and corporate services bottom line, and this is related to some cost of living increases in salaries and the net balance for.
I think we've lost Director Culver. He's frozen.
If he doesn't come back in the next couple of seconds, I could potentially present this section on his behalf. We'll just give him one moment in case a single restart will work.
Okay, thank you, Sonia.
Okay, I'll dive in there. And so on the slide, so for customer and corporate services overall, Executive Director Culver didn't quite get the point where he was going to say that there is an administration portion, which is the slide that's showing right now. And there are also separate sub-departments which will be presented by their managers in just a moment. For example, Fleet and Facilities is just about to come up. But from the corporate office, which includes Director Culver and our executive assistant, there are a number of priorities and changes that are on the next slide. The proposals here are a customer service software, and the customer service software will further enhance our ability to reply to the public and to route questions so that we'll know how long they take to answer. We'll know the topics, they'll get to the right people more quickly. And it could potentially also help people link to our various systems where they need logons to get in, things like registering for a session at the pool or their taxes. We're going to manage the Greener Collingwood internal initiatives from this budget. There's a bit of call center software that we're proposing. We're also underway in the project with Deloitte, who were hired through a procurement process with some of the provincial funding that was provided to us to develop an authoritative set of the programs and services which are going to help us in our budgets going forward, because it will be a full, true, and current set of the services offered that can then be managed going forward through the decisions of council. We're putting together more customer service supports and doing some cross-training of frontline people so that we can have them move back and forth between places like the pool, the town hall, the planning, etc. So we have better coverage, and some needed training on de-escalation of situations. We do occasionally have people come to the counters that are quite perturbed or have some challenges. And that's it for the overall corporate side. And I will ask that Fleet and Facilities present their piece, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and staff. You can move to the next slide. So the Fleet and Facilities summary here is it's a summary of 3 different components. One being Fleet and Facilities staff and expenses. The second being the Collingwood Terminals operating budget. And the third component was an accommodations budget that has now been eliminated. It was in place for the duration of the inquiry when we had off-site leased space. Now that finance has repatriated the town hall, that space has been given up. And so when you look at the numbers here, there are three factors that are really controlling it. The first is fleet and facilities staff, salary and benefits, and a small amount for vehicle maintenance and that sort of thing. We really don't have a lot of discretionary spending. We tend to work with departments on their capital requirements and so forth. So the second component that increases this substantially is the $340,000 for the Collingwood terminals, heritage assessment, and the P3 RFP process. So one of the key projects this year is the grain terminals. As I just mentioned, the heritage assessment, going through the process of hiring a P3 consultant and going through the open market competition to get some public interest in the facility. A second priority is, and is included in the budget, is the addition of a capital projects coordinator. And this is required not only for the terminals project and continuation of the development of staff accommodations and climate change response, but also for a multitude of other capital projects and maintenance projects that we have difficulty completing on an annual basis. As Treasurer Switzer mentioned, the asset management plan, the facility condition assessments for all of the town facilities will feed into that asset management plan and fulfill that legislated requirement. But it will also provide us with a detailed equipment inventory that we can then use to expand our facility maintenance contracts to be able to go into other focus areas such as HVAC and elevator inspections and electrical contracts and so forth. We have several ongoing energy conservation projects. We've been doing a lot of work on real-time analysis of energy consumption, and we have several LED light retrofits to get done. Next slide. Staff accommodations. In 2018, we had the consultant report on staff accommodation requirements. Along came COVID, and we learned a lot in terms of how staff can work and the way that we can proceed going forward. And so we intend to do a thorough update of that report in light of what we've learned. And the last item there is a listing, essentially, as an example of the projects that are scheduled for this year that will be, or some of the projects that are scheduled for this year that will be managed by fleet and facilities, but they actually, the capital resides in other departmental budgets. But it gives you a sense of the size and the scope of what we face, along with a multitude of other smaller and maintenance-related projects. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Who's up next, Mike?
That would be myself.
Ah,
Good
welcome,
afternoon, or
Mike.
good evening. Good evening, everybody. So hello, members of the committee and fellow staff and members of the public. So it's my pleasure to give you an overview of the information technology budget. So we can go to the next slide. You can see that we have a bit of a change on our 2021 budget to accommodate immediate needs. Last year, we were able to keep our levels at a basic increase. However, we have a lot of unavoidable increases for 2021, namely in infrastructure back end. So we've done a lot of moving around to try to accommodate stuff. So you'll see the majority of the increases are in an unavoidable, although we do have some items in growth and a service enhancement. So we can go to the next slide. You know, the IT department is a very busy department. So last year, about a year ago, we implemented an IT steering committee, which was a recommendation from the Perry Group report that we previously received. So IT assists the decisions of this committee by helping to lead and steward departments as required. Some of those decisions made previously will see solutions rolled out in early 2021. So as Treasurer Switzer mentioned, namely virtual City Hall. And as Greg Miller, our chief building official, will mention a little later on, City View, but the virtual City Hall platform is ready to launch, and we look forward to bringing that forward in early 2021, as well as City View. It will also allow enablement for you know, some certain bring forward items such as burn permits and the ability to pay or top up transit passes. Another big item for us when we you know, the town was, sorry, the IT services were brought in-house into the town. We brought forward a IT security assessment. So phase one of that assessment, or we had a reassessment performed last month, and phase one was completed. Phase two is kind of in the process now. We expect some findings from that report, which will obviously, being a security first minded organization, or at least a department, you know, we look forward to implementing those improvements to improve our security landscape and posture. Another item as part of our base budget is a formal needs analysis and a development of an IT or a GIS governance policy. You know, the Perry Group, when we commissioned that report, it was very IT specific and did not include GIS. So it's going to help my GIS specialist and I are going to spend some time in 2021 to do a proper needs assessment to help identify what gaps exist. It'll also help our specialists work plans into the future and help develop a proper governance plan that'll include data standards. And I think we've done a great job of expanding the use of GIS within the municipality. It's now being leveraged by our PRC and fire departments. However, you know, these increases just increase the demand for GIS assistance. And so as a result, one of our immediate needs is to assist with the delivery of the asset management plan for 2021. So our water, storm, and sanitation assets exist in GIS. And so one of those unavoidable items is a GIS seasonal resource to assist with ensuring our GIS assets are validated, maintained, and up to date. The resource will be shared between our IT and water departments. And we had a resource back in 2019, and it yielded a huge benefit to our department. And go to the next slide. And I will mention that I do have a couple of items here mentioned as capital. They are really unavoidable, and we take our unavoidable, actually our capital is funded through transfer to capital through operating anyway. And I do have this a little bit backwards, so I do apologize, but obviously one of the more unavoidable items to transfer to capital is to support our infrastructure, and that's our server assets, network, desktops, laptops, all that stuff. So this year with the pandemic, most organizations got a crash course in working remotely, and where we were prepared, we didn't anticipate the rapid uptake of various technologies. So a good example is the platform we're using tonight. And I wish I had bought in stock in video conferencing prior to the pandemic. One big item was server storage. So with all these videos that we record, and what we've had is a massive uptake on how we do things internally converted over into electronic offerings. So this is a big, massive spike in data growth. So we are currently at 78% capacity in our current server systems. Really, the rule of thumb is not to exist past 80% because you do have performance issues and risks with updates and stuff. So a baseline just in terms of traditional growth is about 4% annually. Last year, we were sitting at around 66% around this time, and we're now at 78% capacity. With this new server, it'll add capacity to support today and future and provide relief until our initial platform of servers are due for retirement. So we're adding a hyper-converged node to our core cluster of servers. And so with all this data, we need to back more up. And of course, 78% of that capacity, some of it is initial backup on our system. So that's based on how we prioritize. We also offload our primary backup to storage appliances, and then we replicate that data over to a tertiary site with appropriate backup retention, which we are struggling with due to all the growth. So we will require additional backup appliances to assist that offer better compression and deduplication on our data to meet our retention needs. And a part of all that backup as well, we've obviously in the massive uptake and rolling out of various offerings, we do have a we do require Office 365 backup. So, you know, another way that we conduct our operations is through a number of Microsoft technologies. So we use Microsoft Teams and Microsoft SharePoint, as others have mentioned. And we are in the process of finalizing an email migration to Exchange Online, which is part of the Office 365 suite. So all of this data needs to get backed up, and the Office backup licensing is growth related and is one of our growth items. And basically to support all of the server infrastructure, which is on my bullet point number 5, is a UPS. And a UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply. It's basically a big battery bank. And it was an item that I actually deferred last year to bring forward this year, but it is a warranted item in 2021. So traditionally data centers are protected with large battery backups and a generator. So in the event of a power failure, UPS will supplement the power in the data center until the failover power source provides power. Our primary data center, it's at our fire hall, and the environment is currently at capacity in terms of the available power in the UPS. And the additional equipment we need to add, you know, we do have a power capacity issue, so we do require a UPS plus electrical work in our data center. We did the similar exercise in Town Hall when we installed the Town Hall generator, and it services 2 communication closets at Town Hall. So we size the UPS appropriately in the event of a generator failure so that there's enough runtime on the batteries to allow for an overlap in service response times for the generator, which is usually about 4 hours. And it also provides appropriate time for IT staff to get on site to manually power down the systems in the event of an extended emergency. And speaking to our fire chief, there actually have been a few recorded instances where the generator at our fire hall have failed to start. In addition to unavoidable items is the service contract for the existing UPS at Town Hall. The Town Hall was completed and IT has assumed this maintenance contract as part of our budget. We also have our traditional desktops and laptop replacements for 2021. And rounding out the last items, Microsoft's changed some of their service offerings with their Office 365 licensing. So we've had to adjust the type of license for a number of our users. And we also have a service enhancement to deliver phone services through a web-based client for people working from home. So that allows individuals to have their desk extension at their phone, which also avoids issuing cell phones to staff and kind of supporting those devices. So that wraps up the IT portion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Good evening, Council and fellow co-workers and the public. I guess I'm up next for Human Resources. So next slide, please. Okay, for the Human Resources portion, you will see that there is a decrease, and that is partially because of the compensation review project. The majority of that work is going to be completed in 2020, although unfortunately some of those, the recommendations won't come forward to Council until 2021. You will also see some service enhancements added to that. And if we can advance to the next slide, I'll explain where those come from. So for 2021, the main priorities and changes for the Human Resources Division is, as I mentioned, the compensation review. So there's about a $43,000 coming out of the budget because, again, the bulk of that work is going to be completed in 2020. So that does not need to carry forward into 2021, but the remaining funds will be there because we will have some follow-up work that has to be done from the recommendations from that compensation review. the performance management system. We were approved to start that project in 2020, but due to financial concerns related to COVID earlier in the spring, that was one of the projects that was deferred until 2021. That's to obtain a online or electronic system. Right now, everything is done manually. So it's a very administratively cumbersome process for us. Our budget also includes support for our health and safety programs. So things like supporting the Joint Health and Safety Committee and its members, and to ensure that they get the training that they need to carry out their functions, but also things like noise surveys, job demands analysis, those types of things to make sure that our staff stay safe while they are at work. Collective agreement negotiations, one is underway now. There will be another agreement that comes, that expires in 2021. So that will be a lot of work next year. Employment lifecycle management is also included in the base budget, and that's to make sure that as a service department to the rest of the corporation, we're getting the information to the other service areas such as fleet and facilities, IT, purchasing, for example, to make sure they get the information they need about any employee changes, new staff, staff that leave, those types of things. Judicial inquiry, we anticipate there may be some updates to human resources policies or employment agreements, for example, as an outcome of the recommendations from the judicial inquiry. The other new projects that we have on the go for 2021, council has indicated that they would like to see some awareness training for staff and for council members regarding diversity and inclusion. So we've included that as a service enhancement in this year's budget. And I'll skip down to the developed work from home policies. So as both the fleet and facilities manager and the IT manager mentioned, with working from home, we got thrown into that due to COVID, but certainly there are other advantages to having staff not work at on site. So things like environmental, reducing greenhouse gases, promoting work-life balance. So those are some of the things that may benefit staff to continue to work from home. So we've set aside some funds if we need to help staff carry those things out. And we anticipate that may help as well with things like town hall accommodations, and there may be some savings there. And lastly, we've requested an HR support, so an 8-month co-op to help us with some of the administrative burden in HR, because we're certainly limited at capacity at the moment. And this will provide a valuable learning opportunity for either somebody currently in a post-secondary program or a recent graduate. And that's it for human resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
If I may, Your Worship, I'll apologize for dropping off, but the benefit of having amazing staff outweighs the bad children that eat up your bandwidth when you're on a very important meeting. So I apologize. I've yelled. I hope it stays whole, and I just wanted to apologize for fading away.
Oh, no need to apologize, Dean. It's all part of working from home, and welcome back. Councillor, are there any questions or comments on the corporate services presentations we've just received? And just give me a minute because I can't see everyone here. Thank you. All right, seeing none, and I will pass it back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Your Worship. And we'll be moving into perfect. I'll pass over to Chief Parr.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor Hall and Council. Thank you for listening to this tonight. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we don't have a major increase. Most of the increases are unavoidable to do with contract obligations and other unforeseen increases across the corporation this year. Next slide, please. Well, I will mention one thing. There was an increase, showed an increase to part-time staff, which is my volunteer corps. It's just that fluctuates year to year. We try to maintain 12. We're at 11 now, and we hope to proceed to the 12th next year. So some of the priority changes and increases are dispatching based on population and the growth of population with the per capita rate is increased. We also have a technical rescue increase, and that's a contract or agreement we signed with Barrie Fire for things that we can't support or deliver. Synergy 911's another program went up a little, and then that total was 11,000 increase, and 90% of that increase is because of population growth within the town. So the more we grow it, more it costs us for certain services. I've asked for emergency planning budget to be increased. It was reduced from our 2019 estimate or our approval to in 2020 by 2,000, like that increased. And I think the explanation there, I think one word, pandemic. There was a lot of cost at the beginning of the pandemic, and if we ever do have to staff the emergency operations center, that would go. Radio increased $2,000, just its life costs with radios, but batteries, etc., and some of our tower capabilities here to maintain. You can see the salaries, allocated salaries, and then in capital through it. So this is through asset management. We're asking for the replacement of one of our support vehicles, and it's a little upside, but no extra cost compared to half-ton just because of our new boat purchase. And our SCBAs, which is our lifeline for firefighters. They're at their max life now and to be replaced. That is a high cost, but it's not as bad as I thought with the US dollar starting to loosen its strength and Canada coming back, but understanding all this is manufactured in the United States. Next slide. Some of the priorities, putting burn permits online, so easily accessible, doing a digital format to reach commercial industrial customers for annual requirements. Instead of wasting person hours out there driving the pavement, we can actually do this through digital and be able to do more inspections and be more proactive with public education. As you can see with training suppression, that's ongoing, increased fire safety, public education services inspections. We'll be able to increase that if we can get the digital format going, which we have a young, fresh staff member that has a plan for that, and it's looking awesome. Succession plan, like always, that's why we try to maintain our volunteer corps to be able to have the succession plan, but this also pertains to inside. None of us are getting any younger, and maybe we'll have to look at replacement in the near future. And then our emergency management program as it evolves, as we've seen, who would have thought a pandemic was happening. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ross.
Through your worship, I'd just like to call Greg Miller. He'll walk us through the bylaw services section.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Welcome, Greg.
Good evening. Thank you, your worship, members of committee and council, and those from the public watching this evening. I'm just going to skip to the priorities and changes. What we have listed here is a very brief, high-level overview of some of the priorities and changes that we expect in 2021. The first one being is the COVID-19 pandemic has been affected all over globally, but with respect to Collingwood here, bylaw enforcement has been very proactive with enforcement of the provincial and health unit emergency orders. It's actually impacted our workload quite considerably. We've had over 700 COVID service requests, which is an increase of 25%. We see that continuing into 2021, especially the upcoming summer, and we do have a solid game plan in place for that. Our bylaw cases are increasing 15% year over year. If we take COVID cases, the COVID bylaw enforcement cases out of the equation, right now we're about 2,100 service requests, and that's an increase of 16% over last year. Continuing on with our services, just like any other department, we are being stretched to provide the services that council and members are public are expecting us to provide. We have introduced the bylaw supervisor position on a contract basis, and we are looking at converting that to a permanent full-time, and that will affect the base budget as noted on the slide. Very similarly, as a licensing and enforcement officer, we're looking at a contract position to help us better understand some of the licensing challenges that we have and help us with the licensing reviews such as taxi, ride sharing, and short-term accommodation. And with respect to the overview of what we do. Again, I can probably take up all the slides, but on the next slide is a very brief summary of some of the services that we provide. With that, Your Worship, I would be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Who's going to take us through the OPP?
I'll walk us through that, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
So next slide, please. So as you can see from the chart here, the OPP contract, the total levy requirement, slow down a bit, is just under 5.5 million. As you can see, this is a contracted services, so all staffing needs are determined by the OPP. The unavoidable increase that you see in 2021 of just under 215,000 relates to the annual contract that we received from the OPP that provides what the 2021 contract amount is going to be. And there was an increase of, again, just under 215,000 for the 2021 contract. Next slide, please. OPP priorities are set by the Police Services Board, and as I mentioned, the major change for 2021 is the increase for the OPP contracted services. And that's all for the OPP section. I'll pass it off to Director Slama to walk you through the conservation report.
Thanks, Mike.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. This business plan and budget covers the town's relationship with the Nottawa-Sauga Valley Conservation Authority, including the town's Conservation Authority levy and payment for services covered under our Memorandum of Understanding. This budget also covers debenture payments for the Black Ash Creek rechannelization. Can you forward the slide, please? The unavoidable increases noted for 2021 is the net between a small increase in the Conservation Authority operating levy and a small decrease in the Conservation Authority capital levy. The revenues allocated come from an area-specific development charge related to the Black Ash Creek. This means that the town will see DC revenue when specific benefiting properties develop. The value included in budget for 2021 is an estimate based on previous year's income. We note there is no dedicated staff allocation under this budget. In fact, staff from engineering, planning, and public works are often working with the NVCA on town-related watershed items. Next slide, please. Under priorities, the town's Memorandum of Understanding is slated for renewal in 2021, and this will be a focus of staff. Staff will also be following the recently proposed changes to the Conservation Authorities Act and subsequent need to develop additional MOUs. As a note, the Black Ash Creek debenture payments will be paid off in 2024, so we're getting close to the end of that. Are there any questions on this budget?
Thank you, Peggy.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that concludes this section. Council, are there any questions or comments on the protective services presentations that we've just had? Seeing none, and I note that Councillor Madigan has joined us. Welcome, Bob. And I'll pass it back to Treasurer Switzer.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'll just wait. There we go. I'll pass this over to John Velick. He will walk us through the transportation section.
Actually, I'm going to start Treasurer Switzer, if that's okay.
Of course.
Okay, next slide, please. The transportation budget covers all activities under the divisions of Public Works and Engineering. Some of the significant changes in the operating budget include an increase in snow clearing contracted costs. These have been offset by some operating efficiencies and the reallocation of some budget amounts. Included in 2021, the road debentures will be maturing, resulting in a reduction of $642,000 in operating expenses. So that's positive news. And also as a reduction in the budget, the transportation budget for 2021, there was monies allocated under studies that don't need to be completed in 2021. So but the studies budget has been reduced. The divisions of Public Works and Engineering include 30 full-time employees and 4 seasonal employees for winter operations. This year, we are requesting an additional staff for within engineering, which Manager Velick will speak to. So Manager Velick will take us through the division's operating priorities and capital projects. And I just wanted to note that Public Works Manager Dan Cole was unable to attend this evening, so John will be speaking to both of those divisions. Go ahead, John. Next slide, please.
Have we got John with us?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute as well.
Oh, okay.
I guess maybe John is struggling with the connection at the moment. So I will at least start, and if John's able to join us, he will move us through. So of the priorities, one of the fundamental priorities is the ask for an engineering technician. This would be funded 50% by developed engineering fees and 50% from the tax base. So there's a variety of focuses for this position. So that includes assisting with some of the tasks associated with the construction of development. They would also be working on our programs related to safety, traffic safety, and the crossing guard policy that has been proposed. The other items of the master stormwater plan, that's a continuation of the study that was started previously. So we have the final phase moving forward. And these other 2 items are some of the standard operations that occur within this budget. Next slide, please. We also included an update to our development standards. And as I mentioned previously, there is the item of winter control, which we had an unavoidable increase due to newly procured services, which just resulted in an increase to that cost. Next slide, please. So I'll just check right now, see if John was able to connect. I'm assuming he is not.
Yes, I'm here, Peggy.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yes, now we can. So I'll let you take it away, John. And I'm not sure if you heard me, if you wanted to add anything in particular about the engineering technician position that I missed.
Yes, I'm not. Sorry about that. So this engineering position is growth related item funded 50% through development engineering fees and 50% through taxes. The staff member will assist in the review of development applications and the implementation of new services such as traffic calming, crossing guards, and active transportation projects, among other duties. Some of the challenges we're facing is the tremendous pressure from development. We currently have 1 staff member working part-time on site plan applications. So it's a full-time staff member, but they're spending only about 60 to 70% of their time on site plan applications. This year we have had about 58 submissions to the end of November, which is challenging to keep pace with. Plus, this person is also required to administer agreements during construction. Also, the engineering department has anywhere from 10 to 15 various capital projects and studies a year with no project manager. So assistance is needed in this area to help run projects. The next project is the master stormwater study. This is the 2nd phase of the master study. Phase 1 determined deficiencies in the town system, while phase 1 will determine what is required to mitigate these deficiencies. Just as an update, we have a draft report for phase 1, and we'll be bringing that report to council in the new year. Next project is sanitary maintenance and video inspections. This includes a condition assessment of the town sanitary sewer via video inspection It includes money to spot repair defects and also includes money to repair the town's or maintain the town's sanitary hydraulic model. The final project on this page is the Oak Street Canal floodplain mapping. This project builds on previous stormwater modeling work completed for the Oak Street Canal, and this project will calibrate the existing model with some real-world rainfall data. Next slide. Further operating projects include the development standards update and winter control, which Peggy briefly touched on. Next slide. Next I'll walk you through our capital projects using these maps. Next slide. The first project is the Huron and Niagara Crosswalk. This is a new signalized crosswalk at Huron and Niagara. This is carryover from 2020, where we experienced some COVID-related delays in our early field work in the beginning of spring. Next slide. Minnesota Street Storm Sewer. This is phase 2 of the project, where phase 1 was completed this year. This is to repair a partially collapsed sewer within the parking lots of the OPP station and the Adult Learning Center. Staff have made an application for funding under the ICIP grant for $1.7 million, and results should be available in the next couple of months. Next slide. Next project is Mountain Road upgrades. So this is road reconstruction to 5 lanes from Cambridge to 10th line. It's scheduled to take place in 2022 and 2023. It's a very large project for the town. The 2021 budget includes costs for utility relocations and property acquisitions in anticipation of the ultimate works. Next slide. This is Peel Street urbanization. This project includes the reconstruction of Peel Street from Hume to Bush. The primary purpose is to repair damaged storm sewer, but we'll see complete reconstruction of the road, including a cycling facility. 2021 costs are for engineering, with construction taking place in 2022. Next slide. This is the rehabilitation of the bridge at 6th Street and the Oak Street Canal. Engineering Services has devised a 10-year capital program to rehabilitate the town's bridges based on our biennial inspections. This is the first project on the list and will include design in 2021 and construction in 2022. Next slide. A Cranberry Trail West water feasibility study. We have the last couple of springs been experiencing flooding at the Cranberry Trail West and Highway 26 intersection. Funds under this project are to conduct a feasibility study and complete detailed design for future construction. Next slide. This is the Maple Bike Priority Street. This project was initiated by the Trails and Active Transportation Committee. The infrastructure would limit the amount of through traffic permitted on Maple, making the route more attractive to cyclists. Staff would like to investigate the impact this would have on local traffic patterns and to gauge public interest. Funds would be used to conduct traffic counts and analysis, prepare preliminary concept plans, and conduct public consultations. This project is to be considered by council as an additional service enhancement budget item. Next slide. This is the sanitary renewal program. This is our annual program. We're tentatively proposing 5th Street from Hickory Street to Oak Street. The project includes full reconstruction of the road, drainage improvement, storm sewer, sanitary sewer, and possibly water main. 2021 funds would be for engineering with construction in 2022. On this slide, I'd like to highlight the traffic calming and crosswalk projects. Traffic calming project is to be considered by council under the additional service enhancement options. This money would pay for projects that may come out of the traffic calming policy. Crosswalks, we have numerous requests for crosswalks at various locations, and the 2021 budget would be for warrant review and design at one location with construction occurring in 2022. The asphalt resurfacing program, this is our annual program where we shave and pave local streets. And the annual sidewalk replacement program is to replace cracked and damaged sidewalk bays and guide rail repairs that came out of our bridge study. And this is just local guide rail repairs at various sites around town. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, John.
I'll continue and start with the transit, Mayor Saunderson.
Okay.
Next slide, please. The transit budget covers the administration, management, and facilitation of the town's transit services. This includes conventional and accessible transit and our inter-municipal Collingwood Blue Mountains link. The transit services are separated into two budgets, one for conventional transit or call trans line, and another for accessible transit or the Red Cross contract. All transit services are provided by third-party contracts. The budgets presented today cover the service costs for these existing contracts. The budgets reflect inflationary increases for the contracted services. For this year, this has been offset somewhat, or for 2021, this has been offset by some COVID-related items, including a reduction in our service level, but also reflects increased cleaning costs and less fare revenue being received. While Chris Wisniak is our transit coordinator, the staffing cost is not allocated under this budget, nor is staff time associated with customer service or finance related tasks. So that's something for us to consider in the future. We do have our transit coordinator, Chris Wisniak, to take us through the transit priorities and focus items for 2021. Next slide, please. Chris, are you on the line? Not sure if Chris was able to connect, so I can speak to these priorities to keep this moving along. So one of the items we've included is the accessible on-demand service. And further to the staff report that we presented recently, this would be a service enhancement and allow for the continuation of our on-demand or taxi shuttle-based accessible service. We've allocated $60,000 for this. Included in the budget is our bus replacement program, and some of which is funded by the ICIP and reserve funds. We have allocated a budget for our transit service review and optimization study. And the budget also includes our bus refurbishments slated for 2021. Next slide, please. Are there any questions related to the transportation or transit budgets?
Council, any questions? Councillor Hammond, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. When I was listening to the description of work that would be done to reconstruct Peel Street, I thought I heard it would include a cycling facility. Did I hear that correctly?
I think you did. Peggy, would that go to you or Chris?
It should. The answer is yes, but John Bellick might be able to provide further details.
Sorry, go ahead, John.
Yes, through your worship, it was identified in our cycling plan for bike lanes. We are going to try and we're extending the facility. We want a complete facility all the way from Hume all the way to Collins. We don't want to just stop midway within our project limits. So we're working within the right of way to try and fit some sort of facility. Right now, it's looking like shared bike lanes as opposed to dedicated bike lanes, just because we don't have enough real estate. But yes, there will be some formal cycling facility within Peel Street.
Okay, thank you. My second question is about the Maple Street closure for the bike project. And the need for a traffic study to examine the traffic impact. And I'm just wondering, and why that's important, because I know that we have seen many things come to our council where there is significant impacts that are going to be on the residential streets because of what's happening on First Street and High Street and Mountain, and no study's been undertaken of all that impact other than we've been told it's going to be a terrible impact. So I'm just wondering why a portion of Maple Street, which is going to be, restricted to bicycles, why we have to spend all this money on a study for the traffic impact.
Yeah, so through your worship, the intent of the project is to divert vehicles off of Maple Street. Those vehicles are going to be diverted to adjacent streets. And I would like to have the ability to tell the people who live on the adjacent streets what that impact will be. Because I think a lot of their concerns will be what's going to happen to traffic on my street. And the purpose is to answer that question.
So, and I don't know if you've had a chance to think about this yet, so I'll just ask it. Has there been any thought about doing that kind of a study to see what the impact is on our residential streets from the increasing amount of traffic on our arterial roads?
John? I'm not understanding the question.
So when I looked at our master traffic study that was done maybe a year or two ago, it concluded there would be huge amounts. I'll just use huge amounts as a euphemism for, minus E to the 10th degree on First Street and High Street and Balsam and so on, and that there would be overflow traffic going into our neighborhoods. And I've been always wondering what that impact's going to be and how we're going to address it. So I'm wondering if staff is going to be looking at that at some point.
Through your worship, I don't have a number on my top of my head, but I would think those there would be increases to the local roads. I would suspect they would be minor. We can look at that in the next round of our master transportation study, but it's just a matter of scope and cost and how granular you want to get in your analysis. But I mean, we certainly can look at that in future studies. It's no problem.
Okay, thank you. And my last question through you, Mr. Mayor, is I know it's been explained to me while I've been on council that there is good reasons why our lane markings disappear because the paint doesn't last very long. And it's one of the worries I continually have because of the number of visitors we have coming into our community. And at certain times in the year, there's not even a marking for where the left turn lane is. And so I'm just wondering if this budget is taking a need for more, I guess, this year.
Sorry, I think you froze there, Councillor Hamlin. Maybe you can just repeat that last part.
Oh, sorry. I'm just wondering if this budget takes into account a more frequent painting of lines on the road.
John?
Or I can speak to that, Mayor Saunderson.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Peggy.
Yeah, so thank you. Through the Mayor to Councillor Hamlin. So this budget includes an allocation for annual repainting of the lines, but it doesn't this year include any additional. So typically we do it once a year, and that's what this budget includes. So if we wanted to consider additional, doing it twice a year, that would be additional costs.
Does that assist Councillor Hamlin? Any follow-up? I think Councillor Hamlin may have frozen on us.
Okay.
Okay, well, when she joins back, I'll give her an opportunity. Councillor Doherty, you had your card up.
Yes, I did. I've had the opportunity to take in the Ontario Bike Summit over the last 2 days, and we did receive a presentation yesterday afternoon on the draft of the updated Book 18. And I have asked the company who have undertaken the draft if they can supply me with a copy of same that I will be sure to pass on to Manager Velick and Director Slama, because it actually will be dealing with some of the matters that we have discussed tonight relative to bike lanes and street crossings, etc. .
Who wants to take that?
Nope. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's good news, and we would appreciate a draft copy of that.
All right. Councillor Hamlin is back. I don't know, Councillor Hamlin, if you had any follow-up questions after your last question there about the traffic impacts around streets in town before you froze, or if those were your questions. I think we might have lost.
So I don't know what's the matter with me. I don't have any children even to blame. So anyway, I think I'm frozen.
Yep,
I may have to switch computers.
Okay. All right, Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you too, I believe Manager Valek, could you kindly offer us a clarification? It's in relation to, you mentioned a crosswalk for 65,000, and I'm just trying to please clarify if that's one specific location or if that's like for a warrant study at various locations.
For your worship to Councillor Comey, that money would be to conduct a warrant analysis at several locations that have been identified to us from the Trails and Active Transportation Committee. And then once we've found a suitable location that meets the warrants, that money would include the detailed design for one crosswalk that would be then budgeted for 2022.
Okay, so then I suppose it would be common sense to say you'd run the warrants, and I guess the one, and you just have a priority list, the one that highest, and then, but we would end up with a list, which would be great, right? Just to finally solve that. I know that's an ongoing concern for the Trails Committee. There seems to be some high volume crossings. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have another question, please, for Manager Valek, or maybe for Director Slama. And I'd mentioned this at the last time we talked a budget. I get a little fuzzy when we talk about crossing guards, because I hear about them when bylaw presents and they talk about crossing guards, and then I hear it again with the request for an engineering technician. So it's not always clear to me where it begins and ends with who is responsible for the crossing guards. So I would just appreciate a little clarification.
Wants to take that question?
Yes. So through your worship, the report that bylaw had delivered to council this year recommended that the policy and warrant analyses for crossing guards be transferred to the engineering department, as we have more of the technical capabilities to do those. So that's the reason why it's being presented through our budget.
Okay, thank you. And then would the engineering technician that could possibly be hired, would they conduct the warrant study, or they would supervise the crossing guards or something like that? No, the supervision, the administration of the program would still be through bylaw, but any kind of technical analysis would be done through the engineering department. Okay, that helps. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Manager Valek. You're welcome.
Okay, council, any other questions or comments on this, these reports? All right, then I'll pass it back to Treasurer Switzer. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I will be speaking to the social housing section. Next slide, please. As you can see, the social housing bottom line is $100,000, just over $100,000 as the total levy requirement. This relates to the town's social housing program at 145 High Street. As you can see, there's a $12,500 increase in the expenditures, and that relates to, next slide, please. An additional financial obligation as per the contract that we have. So that's increasing the expenses for the social housing program by $12,500. And that's it for this section. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Are we going to get Dean back, or has he got the kids online again?
I'm here, Your Worship. Thanks.
Welcome.
Thanks for your patience.
Go ahead.
So I'll speak to the PRC administration slide deck. If we go to the next slide, please, Stephanie. So what you're seeing here in the increases is the net sum of some reductions we did based on trend and some increases that you'll be able to speak to in the next slide. So there was a significant increase in insurance costs, I think, as council was made aware earlier in the term, earlier this year, I should say. We've also, under the coordinator of well-being and inclusion, her umbrella, we've increased or added or assumed, I should say, the accessibility committee budget. And then following the report that was delivered in July, again, under coordinator of community well-being and inclusion, we've added in a fund to deliver on what was stated in that report regarding developing the Unity Collective, as you now know them, and doing other projects to meet the expectations delivered in that report for becoming a more inclusive community. I think that's about it for this slide. For the Parks Division, I'm going to ask Parks Manager Wendy Martin to speak to her slide deck.
Good evening, Mayor Saunderson and members of council. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead, Wendy.
So the next slide, actually. So this budget section covers parks, trails, harbor, and horticulture operations. Within the 2021 inflation unavoidable increases under the expenses, this reflects cost of living increases, operating costs reflecting a 5-year trend, as well as an increase in utilities, janitorial supplies, that type of thing. Under the revenue unavoidable increases, that reflects an increase in harbor revenue, but also a decrease in sport user fees that we are predicting will happen for a portion of 2021. Under the growth, that is representative of a transfer to capital expense. And service enhancements, if you could go to the next slide, please. Yep. So the service enhancements are reflecting additional staffing. The whole South Georgian Bay is experiencing regional labor challenges, and we're having a hard time hiring all of our seasonal staff just due to not enough people applying. So what we're requesting is to hire 2 full-time park operators in lieu of 4 seasonal staff, and that is showing an expense of $60,500. We have an increase in tree planting funds from a donation, which is excellent. Again, I covered the revenue increase as well as the sport user fee decrease. We're also looking at a service enhancement of full-time park operator, and that will help with our staffing resources that have been stretched with the increase in use of parks, as well as the COVID, the increase from residential growth and COVID, sorry. As well, prior years and changes also include increased sanitation costs due to COVID. Next slide, please. Under our base budget, projects that we're working on include updating the park use bylaw, and that will include public input. It will include formalizing our minimum maintenance standards and our levels of service that support park operations. We do have maintenance standards, but they haven't been formalized through a document and this will be coming to council. As well, staff oversee capital projects such as the Fisherfield Clubhouse, Sunset Point Playground, the splash pad, trails and active transportation projects, a new park potentially being constructed in the Summit View, heritage park improvements, as well additional capital projects such as shoreline protection, waterfront safety, asphalt walkway links, and signage. So staff oversee those capital projects as well. And that is it for the Parks Division.
If I may, Your Worship.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd just like to add in and just reinforce a couple of items that Wendy had mentioned. She talked about the move to more full-time staff as a response to the difficulty in acquiring seasonal staff. But we're also seeing an increase in work in the wintertime. And we also see with full-time staff opportunities to do work in the wintertime that we are not unable to do in the summertime. Trimming back trails, for example, is easier and more available in the winter. And then the other thing I'd like to mention is that she talked about the park minimum maintenance standards. Some of the things that she mentioned are related to the PRC master plan. So I just wanted to give council the heads up that we're working towards continuing to implement the PRC master plan.
Thanks, Dean. Who's going to take us through facilities?
Oh, sorry, I thought. Are there any? I just thought if there were any questions regarding the Parks Division, we could entertain them. If not, then we'll move on to facilities.
Okay, so I'll open it up for questions on Parks and Rec so far. Councillor Comey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to Director Culver. Pardon me if I'm not seeing it here or if it's coming up and I haven't realized. The Pretty River medians, because they're a garden, right? Is that popping up here in the budget for next year?
So through you, Your Worship, unfortunately for the second year in a row, the Pretty River medians have not made it to the budget. It's a significant impact on taxation. It estimated in the neighborhood of $220,000 to do what was discussed with council in 2019. So through prioritization of projects to achieve the budget goals that council had set out, it was stripped from the budget prior to this presentation.
Okay, that's a huge number, so I can appreciate that. It's a little surprising and disappointing we weren't able to find a sliver of that project to move forward with. I think if I recall, and I'm thinking on the fly, I think there were some beautification ideas there, like with banners, like that some component of it, even design work couldn't have moved forward. But thank you for advising that, because I was digging around looking for it. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Culver.
Sorry, if I could just speak to, just so there's clarity on that question.
Sure.
So the design work was effectively advanced. So we have at least a base design that would need to be a bit more detailed. Council, we brought that report to council and council approved that approach. Banners were not a part of that design at council's bequest at the time. So we don't have banners in that program right now. So the 220,000 is based on that design that was forwarded to council back in 2019. So I just wanted to let you know that the money we're talking about is, some completion of the design detail, but really moving forward with an implementation. But it's a very expensive project.
Okay, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through to Director Culver. My question is regarding the tree planting, and it may require Director Slama as well, but we had committed to a 2-to-1 planting elsewhere in the town for the trees that were taken down on here, Ontario, between Lockhart and the Finley area there. And I guess my question is that being tracked? And it's over and above our generous tree donation from the individual donation. So I just want to make sure our 2-to-1 on that project is over and above and not being calculated in with the donated trees.
Yeah, through your worship, I believe they were factored into the project cost, but I'll ask Peggy to speak to that.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Councillor Jeffries. So the 2-to-1 replacement for the trees that were removed along here, Ontario, they've been incorporated in other areas in town, specifically along Finley, along Highway 26 on the east side, And then some trees were added to the large complement of trees that were being planted at Fisher Field. So those are being counted and counted separate from what falls under the parks annual replacement.
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments, Council, before we move to the next area? Seeing none, I will pass it back to Treasurer Switzer.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Sorry.
And I'll pass it over to Executive Director Culver.
And I get to pass it over to Manager Mel Milanovic.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, members of council, fellow staff. So we flip to the first slide there. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
All right, good. As you can see in the first line, there is a 2.6% increase to expenditures for 2021. These increases are directly related to utilities, natural gas, and salaries. There is a decrease in revenues of just under 6%. Is directly related to COVID, as several groups have not returned to playing hockey, and our rental spaces have not reopened, as it would directly affect our capacities within the facilities. As you can see, our head count is going up in 21, or is expected to go up in 21, with the addition of the splash pad operation, which is due to open midway through 2021. We move to the next slide. So some of our priorities and changes for this year, the implementing of a formal preventive maintenance program for HVAC for all our rec facilities. So we plan to go to market for a PMA, a preventive maintenance agreement for our HVAC equipment. This will help prolong our assets, as well as the project. This project will be funded through the operating budget, sorry. So we would like to complete the construction of the outdoor storage building at Central Park. Previous years, we've had the drawings, they're completed, they're ready, the tender documents ready to go to market. So the current storage facility is nothing more than 2 sea cans that are placed 10 feet apart and have a covered roof. The structure seems to me to be never meant to be a permanent structure, so it is not secure, requires a new roof and other minor repairs. A new building would allow staff to work safely within the facility and not be exposed to harsh outdoor elements. The equipment and tools would remain safe and secure inside the facility. So this project is funded through DCs, 90% and 10% indoor rec and reserve funds. The second phase of the sprinkler project, first phase was completed in 2019, and that included the town hall. The second phase was supposed to follow the following year, but it was bumped out to hopefully bumped out to 2021, which would include the Eddie Bushman Memorial. Let's be honest, the Eddie Bushman Memorial is a heritage building, and in order to protect this asset, a sprinkler system is required. We'd also like to see a purchase of an ice resurfacer for the outdoor rink. The current ice resurfacer is 14 years old, and it's at the end of its life cycle and should be replaced. The wait time for an ice resurfacer is approximately a year. Can we move to the next slide? All right, once assume operational control of the splash pad at the Alwyn Water Play Park, then one of the unavoidable increases that we have. So once completed, PRC facilities will be responsible to staff and operate the splash pad. Expenses associated with the 47,000 are salaries, benefits, chemicals, janitorial supplies, building and equipment maintenance. Ensure compliance with government agencies, so TSSA, MOL, which Ministry of Labor, the Electrical Safety Authority, and the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. Compliance with these agencies are solely funded through our operating budget, and is what we do on a day-to-day basis. Training, internal and external staff. Training would include both legislated and professional development. So things like working at heights, aerial platform, first aid, CPR, courses through our associations, i.e. ORFA, the National Pool and Spa Association for pool courses, other courses like legal awareness, are all developmental, professional developmental courses. So once again, continue. The last is continue to operate and maintain recreational facilities. So our staff are, subjected to, are responsible for cleaning and disinfecting public spaces, waste disposal, regular maintenance of equipment, liaise with public, ice and pool maintenance, etc. That would be it for facilities.
So through you, Your Worship, I think I probably missed the instruction while I was during one of the times when my kids were being bad. So apparently we're waiting until the end of the entire department before we do questions and answers. So my apologies for interrupting the process. We'll keep on moving and move on to rec services, please.
Good, thanks, Dean. And
this I get to hand over to Michelle Finley.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? I am here to present the PRC Recreation and Services slides. Next slide, please. So our 2.8% increase in expenditures is directly related to salaries and benefits. And unfortunately, a very direct hit to our revenues is expected in 2021 due to COVID and capacity restraints and programming restraints that are being placed on us currently. So a total levy requirement is just under $570,000. Next slide, please. These two priorities were actually in our 2020 budget, but unfortunately we were not able to roll those out due to COVID, so we are pushing them through to 2021. High Five is the national standards that we try to keep our recreation programs at that level, and so there are two training programs that we want all PRC staff to be trained in, and that's the Principles of Healthy Child Development and the Principles of Healthy Aging. Healthy Aging is a new program that rolled out in 2019, and it directly relates to senior programming and how to ensure that that programming is beneficial. And then the second priority is to support for services registration and management through Perfect Mind application and implementation across PRC and corporation. So currently PRC or Perfect Mind is just being used by PRC, our customer service reps and our booking department, but we are looking to be able to roll that across to the customer service group in under Dean's other hat, his executive director hat. And I believe that's it for me.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Worship. So next we'll move on to Karen Cubitt, who's going to be covering culture and events.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, Karen.
So the Culture and Events Division, it includes arts and culture, special events, the Culinary Museum, and the Simcoe Street Theatre. And next slide, please. Overall in our division, we are looking at a decrease in the 2021 proposed budget. We do have two operational changes proposed. Next slide, please. And these are reflected as unavoidable increases, and they're minor. The first is to replace two damaged interpretive history panels that are at the harbor. That's a $2,200 repair. And we have some minor brick repairs needed on the exterior of the museum, and that's a $2,000 cost. And then I've just listed a few of our capital requests for the year, just as an indication of some of our work priorities for 2021. And this includes completing the arts and culture feasibility study, and I believe Dean wants to address
that. Excuse me, yeah, so we mentioned about the arts and culture feasibility study earlier. And so what happens normally, or what has happened, is money that comes from tax funding, if the project's not done in that budget year, automatically refers to our surplus policy, and then gets put into reserves, but not committed to that specific project. So that's a policy gap that we basically discovered, which is why at the next meeting of council, the SIC, I'll present a report that requests moving that fund into a specific reserve. And then hopefully with that ratification at the following meeting, I think on December 14th, we'll be able to identify that money as being funded from the 2020 tax base, and not have to revisit it for the 2020 budget year. So in fact, if council is in agreement with that report, you won't have to look at that as one of the discretionary expenses of this year, of the upcoming year, I should say. So hopefully that helps explain it, or re-explain it. It has been explained once.
Thanks, Dean. And we'll go, is there any more, Karen, to add to?
No, nothing further from me. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I think that brings us to the end of PRC. So if there's any questions on the second half of the presentations, council, now is your opportunity. Councillor Comey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to Executive Director Culver. Just quickly, so I saw a lot of talk about your verbiage on extra garbage. Sorry, it's so many squares, I don't know where to look, on extra garbage. I just wanted to make sure, of course, we've talked a lot about washroom cleanliness, and then, I mean, no surprise with COVID, and then I think you're adding a lot of washrooms between the soccer pitch and the Sunset Playground. Is that accounted for in this budget, the type of standard of cleaning you're going to need and the additional washrooms?
Dean?
Yeah, through Your Worship, yes, that's exactly what Manager Milanovic was talking about when he talked about forecasting the expenses and incorporating them into the facilities, for example. That's one area where they've been captured, and they've also been captured in parks regarding the Fisher Field soccer.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you very much.
Council, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll pass it back to Mike, and I think we have planning coming up.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And I will pass it over to Director Farr to take you through the planning and economic development portion. Adam?
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors, colleagues, and members of the public. There are a number of expenditures proposed in 2021 in the planning budget that are reflective of the efforts of the town to respond to the significant changes that are occurring in the community and the development pressure that's facing. Calling the next slide, please. Next slide, please. A manager of planning position is proposed. Currently, the Planning and Building Services Department includes 4 divisions. You've heard from Greg Miller, who oversees building and bylaw services. And you'll hear shortly from Director Ridlow, who oversees the Economic Development Division. The 4 divisions were gathered under one departmental roof to achieve related service efficiencies to help fulfill community development objectives related to the interrelated nature of their work. The Planning Division requires extensive day-to-day management and the work of development application review and policy development. There are many different interests in the community, residents, businesses, developers, interest groups, all seeking to find and achieve a balanced development framework that in some way or other represents their interests. But moreover, I think the expectation is that that system reflect community values. And this takes quite a bit of work as we shift to respond to the pressures we're facing. A manager of planning position would help with day-to-day management of the planning division team, help in delivering consistent direction on application review and on policy and process update initiatives. This would free up additional capacity within the director position to help align service delivery and project development across the 4 divisions in the department. support and advance the work programs and related projects. Many of these are interrelated as people come to find. For example, the short-term accommodation file has connections to economic development, to planning in terms of the official plan and the zoning bylaw, and kind of longer term implications for how the community develops in this area. Similarly, economic development initiatives, bylaw investigations and enforcement, development negotiations, they're all interrelated pieces that require work across all 4 divisions. And I believe that was the intent that the town had when they brought them into one department. The additional capacity will also help in providing greater support and coordination of work across other departments on topics like growth management, which brings together servicing, transportation, and planning, and really requires the cooperation of a broader team. In the case of complex policy and development projects, new initiatives and urban design guidelines, tracking and responding to legislative change at the provincial level, identifying opportunities and programs of interest to the town. Another important priority for this year is the completion of the official plan project. It was initiated this year, and in 2021 we expect it to be completed, and there are some continuing costs to bring it forward to conclusion. An update to the zoning bylaw is proposed. Combined with the official plan, the zoning bylaw, these 2 documents are instrumental in guiding development and land use planning in the community. When these 2 documents come into better alignment with community expectations, and when I say community in the broadest sense, you'll see less time spent likely in development review and greater predictability of the outcomes. Last, fee service review for planning and engineering fees is proposed in 2021. This project will assess the cost of process and development application reviews and administering approvals and make recommendations to council for appropriate cost recovery and recommended revised fees. So that concludes the summary of the priorities for this division. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thanks, Adam. I think we'll continue with the economic development, and then we'll ask questions when we've concluded the entire planning portfolio.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll welcome Director Ridlow to present on the proposals for this division.
Good evening, Council, members of the public. It's with great pleasure that I have a chance to take you through the economic development budget. The first thing I want to highlight on the next slide is this is, of course, informed by the recently approved 5-year economic development action plan. You'll recall there are 20 action items under 3 goals. And this budget has been built based on making sure that each one of those action items is funded as appropriate. As part of that, we've also recognized the importance of the Small Business Enterprise Center as part of the broader economic development investment that we make into the community. And as such, you'll see a specific breakout for that as part of the overall budgets. Next slide. In terms of the key priorities, continue to support the extensive services the partners at the Business Development Center provide is absolutely critical, and we've seen the kind of support it has had in the community with traffic more than doubling over the course of the last 5 years from when it started in 2014. One of the features that has also meant is, as I mentioned, the Small Business Enterprise Center becoming a bigger part of it. So you'll see in the budgets that we've recognized that by actually allocating $40,000 within the Small Business Enterprise Center budgets to represent the town's contribution. The vast majority of their funding comes from the provincial government, with an additional lesser amount coming from some of the surrounding municipalities. We will also continue to promote the better lifestyle as Ontario's premier 4-season playground. This certainly includes the recently launched Go Get Out campaign that Council approved as part of the economic recovery plans. It includes Discover Collingwood portal to make sure people know what to do around Collingwood. And it also includes funding for the visitor services provided by the South Georgian Bay Tourism Association. The last most significant priority is supporting workforce development. And as you may recall, we are recommending the return of the Regional Labor Task Force and the Regional Transportation Task Force. All of this under the overall efforts of the Live More Now campaign, which, as you will recall, is a job portal which we provide, and also the ongoing immersion and expansion of Tech Hub North, which is proving a huge success as more and more companies look to Collingwood to set up their tech companies here. Next slide. Some key changes. We are recommending the reclassification of the contract receptionist position at the Business Development Center to a full-time administrative assistant to reflect the expanded importance of that role and the workload that role brings with it. If you recall, that contract receptionist position was established in 2014 when the Business Development Center first opened its doors. We're also recommending the extension of a contract for a consultant to continue supporting the Main Street Modernization Project into the spring of 2021. The Main Street Modernization Project, of course, is the project that's improving the wayfinding for vehicles and bikes into downtown Collingwood. It includes the creation of 2 cycling kiosks, a new digital discovery platform, and the expansion of discovery hubs within the downtown area. And this is largely funded by the Red Ontario Grant, Simcoe County, as well as the BIA. Last but not least, I want to note that the BDC contract expires mid-year 2021. The 11,000 or so increase in revenue reflects the assumption that that contract will be renewed through to the end of 2021 and beyond. That is, of course, part of a separate presentation to council, but that founds the foundation for that 11,000 assumption for the 11,000 increase. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And who will be presenting for the Heritage?
So very briefly, next slide, please. There are no changes to the Heritage program for 2021. The town's Heritage program provides staff support to the Heritage Committee for the administration of Heritage tax relief for qualifying properties in the Heritage Conservation District and wherever else properties qualify for Heritage grants, and to provide assistance in the support for protecting and advancing the protection of the town's built and cultural heritage resources.
Great, thank you. Councillor, questions or comments about the planning section that we just heard? Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I understand that we will have an opportunity next week to get into the weeds a little bit more, but I just wanted to pose the question in regard to the Business Development Center. We are getting contributions from surrounding municipalities, but certainly not anywhere near what the town is putting in to support it. And I appreciate that population-wise, that may make sense. But when one considers the commercial contribution or impact that Blue Mountain Resort is having and how that trickles down to our entire tourism and a lot of our businesses, it seems to me that there may be an opportunity for us to open up the discussion with surrounding municipalities to make a deeper contribution, in which case we will also be able to provide a deeper support service. So not really a question, it's just an observation at this point, unless maybe Director Ridlow wants to remark on that.
I think I could remark on it because I've been in discussions with the CAO and Director Ridlow And I can just advise that staff are aligned with the kind of comments that you made in your just now, that we believe we agree with you, and we've tried to open up a dialogue with other surrounding municipalities to gain some greater recognition of the service benefits that they enjoy.
Terrific, thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
I'm looking at the list of participants and I see that Councillor Hamlin's hand is up. So I'm not sure how one, I think she's having technical difficulties, but I thought I would bring that to your attention.
Okay. Well, if we can get her back, then she can. Councillor Hamlin, did you have a question?
Well, I'm here. I don't know why my hand's up. So I'll, sorry, I don't even have children to blame this on. So I'm not really sure what my problem is, but I am listening and I'm here. And
Okay.
I'll see if I know how to put my hand down. Sorry.
And we'll take it as a wave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that brings us, where are we now on our roadmap here, Mike? We go next to municipal service boards.
That's correct, Your Worship. I'll pass it over to CEO Ken Hay to walk you through the library section.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Can everybody hear me okay? Before
Yep.
Good.
Yep, we hear you very good. Welcome, Ken.
Yep, I have a great laptop. It has a wonderful mic on it, so I'm blessed. Welcome members of council, members of the public, and staff who are listening. I'm just going to take a few minutes to go through the draft budget for the library. Stephanie, could I see the next slide? Thanks. So as you can see, it's a fairly conservative budget. There aren't a lot of changes. We're not asking for any new staff members this year. There are some changes because of COVID, which I'll get into in a minute, and some changes too that have to do with just facilities maintenance. We've asked for some more money there to help cover that kind of costs. Maybe let's just move to the next slide. It's easier for me to explain then. Thank you. So the first item I mentioned here is just that we've noticed over the years that the cost of maintaining the library has been growing year by year. So we've put a lot more money into the budget this year to try and cover those costs. There's also other costs like cleaning costs due to COVID, insurance has gone up, utilities have gone up. And so you'll notice that altogether those come to over $18,000. That's the biggest increase in my budget right there. So that's like 1% of my budget right there is just for facilities maintenance. The other thing we wanted to look at this year, and this comes out of COVID because we've had to move so many of our services online to meet people's needs when they can't come into the library, is we were thinking, well, we've been expanding our online services. Let's do some more in 2021. So there are two things we wanted to focus on. One, we wanted to expand our ebook and e-audiobook catalog. And many of you know, because I think I've explained this last year during the budget, we pool our resources with other libraries in Simcoe County as a way to make our dollars go further. So all of the ebooks that our patrons can download to watch are actually part of a pool that belongs to all Simcoe County libraries in the cooperative. However, I think if you've seen the budget book now, I put a chart in there for people to look at. Collingwood Public Library uses that service more than any other library in the consortium. So we've been contributing the same amount of money into that pot year after year after year. And I thought this year it was our chance maybe to put a bit more money in there because we just use that service more than say Wasaga Beach does or Stainer, and they're contributing the same amount of money as we are. So it seemed timely that we should put a little bit more money in there to help out. The other thing we were looking at doing was we wanted to offer a new online service. So we're looking at Hoopla. This is a streaming service. Other libraries in the area are using it. Blue Mountains, Meaford have already started to use it. It's a little bit different than the Overdrive, which people are used to using for ebooks. This offers movies, television shows, music. It also has ebooks and e-audiobooks as well. It's a slightly different payment model in that the library gets billed every time something is downloaded. So what we have to do to manage that cost is just set a limit per month that each person can download. So we're going to give that a try in 2021 and see how that works, because more and more people are moving online, and we want to try and increase our enhance our offerings there. And then I'll skip to 5 first and come back to 4. So we also anticipate we're going to lose room rentals. This is, Mel mentioned this with the arena and things like that. We're going to have the same problem. So we know that because that's a big part of our revenue, we're going to lose that next year for at least part of the year. So we've worked that into the budget as well. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was the fourth item on that list. And we talked a little bit about this at another council meeting. We want to eliminate overdue fines in 2021. We started doing that this year because of COVID, because it was so hard for people to get things back on time, and because everything had to go into quarantine when it came back. Pretty much everybody would have been paying overdue fines. So we decided just to eliminate it for the rest of the year. But I've talked it over with the board. My younger staff members have been encouraging me to do this for years, actually. I was the stick in the mud that took a bit of convincing. But we would like to just get rid of it because we see it as a barrier to service. And the interesting thing was that when we eliminated fines during COVID, we found a lot of stuff showing up in our Dropbox that we hadn't seen in years. People returning books that they'd had out for a very long time, but when we said there was going to be no fines, suddenly they started coming back. So we realized that's what happens when people start to get really high library fines. Not only do we not get the books back, we don't see them in the library anymore. And that to me seems like a shame. We want people to use the library. So by eliminating overdue fines, we're hoping we're eliminating that barrier. Not to say that we won't have loan periods still. It'll still be a 3-week loan on books. And if people's books become overdue, we can freeze their accounts and they won't be able to use the service again until they bring their stuff back. And I think that will be a good incentive to most people. Also, if things get lost, we will expect a replacement cost to be paid, or damaged, a replacement cost to be paid. And I guess I also want to stress that we're not the only library looking at this. A lot of libraries are doing this now. As I mentioned, I think in our last meeting, Calgary, Hamilton, the whole province of PEI has gotten rid of overdue fines. The Toronto Public Library is working on it. They got rid of children's fines this year. They want to get rid of adult fines in 2021. So we're not the only library looking at this, and not the only library that sort of come to this conclusion. So that's another sort of change in our budget for next year, and that will be a loss of revenue, $6,500 approximately. But we figure it's worth it just to bring more people into the library and make people not afraid to come back to the library if they have fines. And that's pretty much all I had. So I don't know if people had other questions they wanted to ask.
Thank you, Ken. Council, any questions or comments on the library budgets? I'm not seeing any hands. So thank you, Ken. You've covered everything.
Thank you.
And so non-tax supported services.
Yes, through your worship, I will pass it over to Greg Miller to walk you through the building services section.
Thank you. Through your worship, I'll zero in on the priorities and changes again. The building inspector contract position, this is being brought forward as council is aware. 2019 was a record year for building permit and inspection activity. We're still seeing strong permit and inspection activity even during the pandemic. This year, 2020, we do have some workload liability that will be moving forward into 2021, and that's being the Municipal project, as well as some larger, more complex projects that we have coming down the development approval process. So with this position, this will help us maintain the legislative requirements. Under the Building Code Act, council is required to appoint as many inspectors as are necessary to administer and enforce the Building Code Act. The building inspector contract would backfill a position. We'd be looking at an internal promotion with a senior building inspector, whose role would be to do plan review and inspections on the more complex buildings that we will be seeing. I also look after the day-to-day operations of bylaw, and we were effectively operating under a part-time chief building official in that regard. So this is why this position is being brought forward. Secondly is a building permit fee review. Director Farr mentioned during his presentation that they will be doing a fee review for planning and engineering. This will be done in tandem with that as well. So we'll use one consultant through the RFP process under the leadership of Director Farr, and we'll conduct a permit fee review. To my knowledge, I think the last time we did a fee review was about 5 years ago, and since that time, we certainly changed significantly the day-to-day operations of the Building Services Division. The third item on the list on the screen is the Bluebeam and plan review software integration with CityView. For those that do not know, that we actually conduct all of our plan reviews. We do the intake and the plan review of building permit applications electronically. So 100% of that is done without the requirement for files or paper plans. The integration with the Bluebeam would ensure that we have a document management record system in place that will help us capture our plan review comments and working in live time, if you will, with consultants such as architects and engineers. With that, Your Worship, that's a very high level overview of the priorities and changes, and be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Greg. I think we will push through the parking and the other non-tax supported services, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Yep. Absolutely, Your Worship. I'll move into the parking division.
Okay.
And again, highlighting the priorities and changes. The first item is the summer parking students, and with this is a service enhancement. And what we're looking for again is with COVID-19, the pandemic and so forth, the service pressures that we're experiencing in bylaw enforcement. We'd like to hire a total of 4 summer parking students. That's 2 above and beyond from last year's budget. This will help us to better patrol Sunset Point, other parks, and also allow a more positive work-life balance for our full-time bylaw enforcement officers. As I mentioned before, the cases are increasing 15% year over year in addition to the COVID-19. The second one is the increased paid parking revenue at Sunset Point. As council may be aware, we did do a pilot project on Labor Day weekend that ran to Thanksgiving weekend, and we are looking at continuing on with a paid parking program at Sunset Point Park, beginning the May long weekend to Thanksgiving weekend. So there will be requirement for signage, what have you, and again, the summer students. And I should point out that I will be bringing a staff report through the Development Operations Committee and to council, just providing a summary of our findings with the pilot project. Lastly, number 3 is the digital parking passes. As council is aware that we implemented a digitized parking system called Hotspot. And that allows people to pay for parking through their phones. And we would like to enhance that even further by introducing a digital parking pass system. So we'll be looking at eliminating the paper passes. We feel this is a high priority. This will actually reduce the number of person-to-person contact that we have at the front service counter, and which is certainly important. Not only that, I think it's going to increase our service level immensely. This is been a real game changer for our town implementing this type of parking payment system. With that, Your Worship, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Greg. Council, any questions on the building and parking services presentations? Okay, Greg, thank you. You nailed it. So we'll move on then to wastewater and water services, please.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I will start. The water budget covers the operating and capital items related to all water operations. Next slide, please. On this financial bottom line, the revenues and expenses match as the water rates and fees include a reserve contribution for asset replacement. The key changes in the operating budget for 2021 include some revenue adjustments for our new rate structure, and these are based on rate study predictions. We see an adjusted allocation for the town administration costs so that they are more fairly distributed between water and wastewater. So water is seeing an increase in the administrative costs, and later I'll note a decrease in wastewater. There are some savings realized through the procurement of services and materials, and there's also some small adjustments to the operating budgets to reflect actual spending. The water department includes a full-time complement of 17.5 people, And the other half of the half a person is made whole through wastewater, and that's our project engineer, Ken Caden, who looks after capital projects in both the divisions. The complement also includes one current contract position for GIS assistance, and this was approved through the 2020 budget. And this year we're showing a reduction of 3/4 of a person, and this is associated with our Canadian Forces Base contract, which is expiring at the end of March 2021. This budget also includes the position for water supervisor, which was approved under the 2020 budget, but we were unable to implement in 2020, and Manager McGinnity will speak to that. So at this point, I'll pass the presentation over to Heather, and she'll walk you through the division priorities, significant changes, and capital projects.
Thank you, Peggy, and welcome, Heather.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Yes, as Peggy mentioned, the water supervisor position, which was approved as part of our 2020 operating budget, we weren't able to fill that position this year. Unfortunately, we had a lot of competing hiring priorities in the environmental services division with a lot of vacant positions in wastewater that needed to be filled, and also some hiring restrictions earlier this year through the COVID pandemic. So I'm hopeful to fill this position in the first quarter of 2021. The two other operational priorities for water that I wanted to highlight are focusing on enhancing our asset condition information and implementing appropriate preventative maintenance or replacement programs. So the electrical and pumping equipment condition assessments will ensure that equipment at our water facilities are annually assessed and maintained to minimize the likelihood that they'll fail unexpectedly and require emergency repairs. So meanwhile, looking at the water main condition assessments, that will allow staff to better determine the life expectancy of the buried infrastructure and will allow staff to develop a more robust water main replacement program. Next slide. So on the capital side, there are many significant projects currently underway or planned in the water division. The first of which is the water treatment plant expansion, which was mentioned by CEO Skinner earlier in the presentation. The environmental assessment for this project is complete, and staff are gearing up to issue a request for proposal for engineering services to commence the design of the facility. It's a high priority project for the municipality, as much of the equipment within the facility is at the end of its service life. We're also nearing maximum treatment capacity required to meet the water demands in town and in the other municipalities that we service through water supply agreements. Next slide. So the second water project that I wanted to highlight speaks to my previous comment about the aging equipment at our water treatment plant. So our membrane filters are a key piece of treatment equipment at the plant, and they are reaching the end of their service life. These filters are critical to ensuring that we meet the Ontario drinking water quality standards, and the loss of one of these membrane trains could result in reduced capacity at the plant. So while we do have a major upgrade and expansion coming in the next couple of years, we need to be able to continue to meet these water quality criteria and supply requirements until this other project is completed. Moving forward with this membrane replacement project will help ensure that that is possible. We are currently in the process of ordering the membrane filter with an expected delivery and installation date of May 2021. Next slide. So the third capital project to mention here tonight is an upgrade of our water SCADA system. And it's primarily based at the plant, which is why it's shown here on the map at the water treatment system, at the water treatment plant, but it does affect other facilities around the water treatment system. So this project commenced in 2020 with an assessment of our current SCADA system and an identification of any required upgrades. So we're currently working on a request for proposal for consulting services to assist with the selection of a new SCADA software and to develop some SCADA standards for water. Subsequent to this work being completed, we will retain SCADA integration services to implement the new SCADA program for our water system. Next slide. Sorry, next slide. There we go. So moving away from the treatment plant, another project that we're looking to advance in 2021 is a new reservoir and pumping station at Stewart Road. The design for this facility is nearing completion and could go to tender in early 2021. It's a multi-year project with an expected in-service date of 2023, 2024 if construction commences in 2021. Next slide. We're also continuing to work on the design for the upgrades at the Carmichael Reservoir on the west side of town. This work is being completed to allow the reservoir to operate as an in-out facility and to assist with maintaining fire flows and distribution pressures as development proceeds on the west side of town. It's anticipated that the construction on the Carmichael Reservoir will occur in 2021, 2022, and warranty period will extend into 2023. And lastly, next slide, sorry. Lastly, wanting to highlight one of the water main replacement projects that we have scheduled. So we're looking to upsize the water main on 6th Street. This was identified as a priority in the 2019 Water and Wastewater Master Servicing Plan. And because it's showing that our hydraulic model has shown that this water main needs to be increased from a 100 to 150 millimeter diameter water main up to a 400 millimeter water main to allow the movement of water from the treatment plant to the west side of town and to the future Stewart Road Reservoir and Pumping Station. So the entirety of this water main replacement will be designed in 2021, but the construction will be phased. Depending on the timing of completion of the design, as well as the status of the Stewart Road Reservoir project, staff may try to advance the first phase of construction in 2021 as well. And that concludes the Water Division update.
Thank you, Heather.
All right.
So thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I'll just give some beginning words for the wastewater budget. So the wastewater division and budget covers all operations, all operating and capital items that are related to the wastewater treatment facility and our sanitary pumping stations. It also includes our contracted wastewater treatment services for Clearview Township. Next slide, please. So similar to water, on this financial bottom line, the revenues and expenses are balanced through a reserve contribution for asset replacement. Changes to note within the operating budget include some revenue adjustments for our new rate structure, which again is based on rate study predictions. Of note, on the wastewater side, we have incorporated a $1 million reduction in revenue as we reduce the wastewater rate based on a financial analysis of our state of reserves and future projects related to growth. So that was done within the rate study, and that was a decision that was made. The operating budget also sees a reduction in the long-term debt servicing as a debenture will expire in 2021. So that's an approximate reduction of $500,000. The budget sees a reduction in the town administrative costs for a more equitable distribution between water and wastewater. And there's also some small adjustments to reflect actual spending or more appropriate allocations within the budgets. The staffing complement for this division is nine staff members at the water treatment plant. So that includes the new manager. And we're pleased to report that after being shorthanded for most of 2020, that complement is now full. So I'll pass it over to Manager McGinnity, who again will walk us through the priorities and some of the capital projects.
Thanks, Director Slama. So the operational priorities in wastewater next year will focus on the solids management component of the wastewater treatment process, with the first being a digester rehabilitation. So digesters should be cleaned out about every 5 years to prevent a catastrophic damage to either the structure or any of the equipment within the digester. And this is typically caused by undigestible material such as rags and hairballs. So in 2021, we will take digester number 1 offline to complete this rehabilitation. So all the material will be removed and the digester will be fully cleaned out. When it's taken offline and available for us to actually go in, we're going to do an inspection, a condition assessment of the structure and equipment, and then perform repairs if possible before bringing the digester back into service. The second item that I want to highlight is a review of our biosolids disposal contract. So biosolids disposal costs form a significant portion of the wastewater treatment operating budget, and it should be reviewed and put to open market for competitive pricing regularly. This process has not been completed in a while, so I'm looking forward to seeing what options are now available, and this may also be a cost savings for the town in the future. Next slide. On the capital side, there are 3 wastewater projects that I thought I would speak to tonight as part of the 2021 budget. The first being the ongoing repairs to the concrete and brickwork at the wastewater treatment plant. This is a multi-year project that's been underway for several years, and phase 1 is going to be wrapping up in 2020. We're expecting that phase 2, the final phase, will be completed in 2021. So only warranty will extend into 2022 for this project. Next slide. The second project that I thought I would mention is the replacement of the existing sludge transfer pumps at the treatment plant. This project was initiated in 2020, and we've proceeded with the design. These pumps are circa 1950s, and they're well past the end of their service life. We've managed to keep them going till now, luckily, but it's time. We're unable to maintain them and repair them anymore. But unfortunately, as we started the design of this project, our engineers advised us that we have to do significant upgrades to the building to satisfy more stringent TSSA and ESA standards. So this has significantly increased the anticipated cost to complete this project. It's expected that we will do the replacement of the sludge pumps in 2021, and the warranty for this project will extend into 2022. Next slide. So lastly, I thought I'd mention replacement of variable frequency drives, or VFDs, for the raw sewage pumps at the wastewater treatment plant. These are a critical asset because they allow us to move the raw sewage into the treatment processes. But these equipment are now obsolete, and they're having difficulty obtaining parts and repairing the equipment when they fail. So the VFDs will be replaced with new equipment that can be properly serviced and maintained. And that's it. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Heather. And Peggy, Council, other questions on the water and wastewater budgets? I am not seeing any, so thank you very much for those thorough presentations. And Mike, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So next I'll be going through summaries of debt, staffing, and reserves and reserve funds, again, just to provide additional context to the committee and the public as part of this 2021 proposed budget. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a debt update at a high level. As you can see, the town's made great progress on reducing its debt. Included in this year's budget is a total reduction in debt servicing costs of nearly $1.3 million. As mentioned in the budget section presentations, 2 debentures matured in 2020, as well as a debenture in, 2 within Public Works and a debenture within wastewater matured. So of the 1.3 that I mentioned, 700K is tax supported debt servicing. Next slide, please. This slide is quickly covering the summary of the staffing changes that again have been covered in the individual budget presentations. These staffing changes have been discussed, as I mentioned, at a high level. And as you can see, there's an additional request in the 2021 proposed budget for 8.32 full-time equivalent staff, representing an increase of 3.6%, which I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is below the estimated population growth for the town of Collingwood of 5.3% in 2021. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to cover reserves. These are the estimated ending balances of the main reserves that the town relies on to meet specific needs such as election costs, supply a contingency for both capital and operating needs, as well as Public Works with a source of funding for their fleet and equipment requirements. The proposed budget, as you can see with that bubble, includes $2 million in transfers to tax-supported reserves and reserve funds. I just want to highlight that this slide is looking at the reserves, and that $2 million transfer includes both transfers to reserves and reserve funds, which I will cover in the next 2 slides. In addition to the $2 million, included in the proposed budget is $630,000 transfer to reserves and reserve funds. 540,000 approximately, I can't recall the number off the top of my head right now, relates to the amount of levy that's over and above the 2% operating cap that council supported as part of this scenario. The difference between that 540,000 or 580,000 and the 630,000 is additional funds that have not been spent within that operating cap. So as you can see, the reserves have been depleted significantly since 2019, most notably the Public Works Reserve and the working funds. Next slide, please. So continuing with that avenue is the discretionary reserve funds that the town has. This chart provides detail to the committee and the public on the 2017, 2018, and 2019 reserve balances, or discretionary reserve fund balances. As you can see, there's a substantial increase in from 2017 to 2018, which is the result of the asset sale proceeds being moved into the asset sale reserve fund. And in 2019, there is just shy of 600,000 for the modernization reserve fund. Although you can see that these have increased to just under 60 million. Next slide, please. As I said, there's a downward trend in our estimate at the end of 2020 and our estimate in 2021. As you can see, the working capital reserve fund that has been set aside for temporary cash shortfalls, urgent, unforeseen expenditure requirements, unpredictable one-time expenditures, as well as business continuity needs in the event of a disaster has been exhausted. In addition, the life cycle replacement reserve fund is also depleted, and this reserve fund is critical for the asset management replacement needs. The initial AMP calculations from the 2014 asset management plan showed a deficit of $9 million. And while we've done considerable work, the updated asset management plan is still showing an infrastructure deficit in and around that ballpark. So essentially, all of this is an indication that we are not putting enough away into our reserves to fund our future life cycle needs. Next slide, please. And with that, I will pass it over to CAO Skinner, who will walk you through the additional service enhancements available.
Thank you, Treasurer Switzer. So everything that you've heard up until now was related to the scenario that Council asked us to address, which is what is our best recommendation to Council on the essential work that fits within a 2% change in our tax levy. And I will repeat this because it's very important. We're not actually charging homeowners anything different. The 2% is available only because we've had growth, and it's the growth that we're spending. So if whatever our, a homeowner or a business paid last year would be the same number of dollars this year proposed for 2021. However, there were a number of other things that Council has noted as important to them. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And so within that 2% cap, we have left about $60,000, just over $60,000 to hit the 2% cap. And in addition, because of growth, there is another $569,881 available that we have proposed be transferred to reserves and reserve funds. However, at the end of year. However, should council judiciously wish to use some of that funding, that is also possible for these additional service enhancements. So there's some things that you should have in mind before we get into these. One is that if we do open up any new services, we would recommend that council do that judiciously. Once a new service is started, it's difficult to stop doing that service. So you want to make a very informed decision about expanding the scope of services the town offers. And the other thing is something that's been emerging is that staff, due to COVID and some of the things that have changed in year that are very important, new things related to diversity and inclusion, and that's not the only one, that staff really are at a crisis state of busyness. So we have proposed a number of new staff already in the previous section. However, we need to add work judiciously that's going to involve the existing staff. So things that just involve money are easier to do than things that involve money and staff time. So if we could, one other thing before we go to the next slide. Outside of the budget, potentially altogether, there is through the UN Habitat collaboration, the potential to seek external funding for a number of the pilot projects that have been proposed. So no funding has yet come forward, but there have been identification of priorities with things such as affordable housing, development of an international network of community leaders, and proactive approaches to environment challenges and climate mitigation. So if we could please go to the next slide. There are two slides of these projects. And I have one small caveat, which is, I'll tell you when I get there. So additional service enhancement options for your $60,000 plus include enhancing our action on the climate emergency. So this is costed out at about $50,000. It's for a part-time climate specialist. And our proposal would be, if we did this, it should be in the range of a 3-year pilot. The person would be on contract should we do that. So there would be time to A, have results, and B, to evaluate that project prior to moving to anything that was full-time ongoing. The second option for an additional service enhancement is to move forward in 2021 with an urban forest management plan implementation. And the first expenditure would be about $111,000 for an urban forestry expert, including the salary, benefits, etc. I do note that there's about a $359,000 expenditure associated with that from capital, which would be funded from development charges and reserve funds. And that is actually for equipment like a bucket truck and chipper that would be engaged on an ongoing basis to carry out the actual work. The immediate priority for that work would be to look at a tree protection bylaw. There is also a potential that we could proceed under a consulting assignment for somewhat less money on a tree protection bylaw in 2021. However, given the amount of community engagement expected for the management of trees on private property, we don't recommend that option. We do think that there will be a strong need for community engagement that would be best managed by an in-house person with continuity into the future. The third item is support for physician recruitment. There was an ask from the task force on this of about $25,000 from each municipality to support a recruiter. And I think you received an update from Councillor Hamlin on this very recently. Given that our immediate issue is actually a staff, a cap on the number of physicians, We were suggesting a more modest contribution from the staff perspective to the task force and strong advocacy through this year for the business case to get on a high priority list for more physicians. The third last item on this slide is a crossing guard policy, and Councillor Comey had asked a question on crossing guards earlier. And I just wanted to emphasize that the actual crossing guards day-to-day are managed by bylaw. Evaluating future warrants would be under the engineering technician position. And this policy is actually the creation of the warrant. So when would we need a crossing guard? Is it if there's more than X number of lanes with more than Y number of cars with, you know, a certain situation, so that we would decide when it would merit having a new crossing guard. Given that the report that was managed by bylaw is relatively recent, this is one that we see could potentially be deferred for a year or even two until we've started reevaluating locations for new guards. We've put a placeholder in here for funding or resources for a business accelerator, largely because council has not yet been presented that report, but hopefully will receive it prior to making its budget final decisions. And finally, on this page, there is an item related to attainable housing. And typically in a budget, I hope that we don't make too many large policy decisions, but this one has come up recently as being of great interest to council and a number of councillors. And after doing some research, the option recommended by staff is that we proceed under our base budget to finish our official plan work and to start and complete our zoning work with an eye to enhancing our opportunities for attainable housing through those methodologies. Should we wish to take a more proactive stance, there are a couple of options that are presented in the more detailed budget book. But I do think that those start in the range of $170,000 and would include a staff person and a study. One of the challenges for attainable housing really is to understand how much attainable housing of what type would truly make a difference in Collingwood. And that's a big question to be answered. And it also is a role that has typically been with and has been explicitly assigned to the county level as well as the province. So we had some concerns about diving into attainable housing too quickly without knowing enough in advance of the other studies. But we do understand that council does have some priorities, so have made sure to include it here for your decision. The next slide, please. This is the second and final sheet of additional service enhancements. Bylaw has suggested that up to 4 bicycles could be provided to their staff. It would not only model an active transportation approach in town, but could make them more nimble when they're doing some of the things that they do in more congested areas. An animal control lift gate that would save backs and make it more safe when dealing with, for example, dogs and crates being loaded into a vehicle. The traffic calming implementation is here as well. So the study is already funded. This would be the implementation. 145 total, portion from taxes and 35,000 from development charges. And this would be anything that was recommended by the study. So it could include traffic humps or anything else. The one exception that I mentioned, it was mentioned earlier, but just in the context of a map, is this Maple Bike Priority Street for $88,000. That was not included in the totals that you received earlier. It was just included in the map. This is a significant amount of work to do this street. We do need to make sure from a liability perspective that if we are going to defer cars, only allow certain turns in certain directions, that we've designed it very well. So it is a desirable, but not a need. And it is eligible for funding through the federal gas tax, not necessarily through taxes. I think there's a typo in the secure leasable spaces on the waterfront. Treasurer Switzer, I think that is $21,000 and not $212,000. My apologies. Secure leasable spaces on the waterfront. This is should say 21,000. And I think this is an exciting idea for council's consideration. It came from Parks and Recreation, but in the waterfront master plan, there is an intention to activate the waterfront. And this would put the metal C-can type structure or two on the waterfront so that they could be leased by small businesses for things like stand-up paddleboard rentals or kayak rentals, or folks that would be able to use the waterfront. We also have two projects here for arenas. And the first one is an acoustic ceiling for the mezzanine and security cameras at the Central Park Arena, should you wish that. And the second one is a sound system for 80,000 and 10,000 of security cameras for the Eddie Bush Memorial Arena, should you wish that. The second last item is the heading dockside mural replacement. And it's slightly more expensive than it had been last year, just due to some considerations with changing the location at $26,500. And the final item we discussed already this evening, the arts and culture feasibility study. So there will be a proposal brought forward that could enable the using of 2020 funds to finalize that project instead of 2021 funds. But we will deal with that explicitly with you before you need to make your budget decision. And with that, I will turn it back to Treasurer Switzer to talk about the next steps.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. Currently, we're in the process of obtaining public input. This will be ongoing until December 7th. Currently, we have the budget book published on Collingwood.ca as well as the Engage page, and public has the opportunity to provide comments through the Engage page. In addition, they can also contact us directly at budget@collingwood.ca for questions, comments, and feedback. We will be compiling those comments, questions, and feedback and providing a list of those and the answers to on the Engage page, as well as to council and staff. As far as next steps, December 9th, we will be having the Strategic Initiatives Committee budget public input meeting, where we will dive into the weeds of the budget and address public comments. Following that, on December 21st, our plan is to bring forward the final budget to council, and we will be requesting council adopt that those budget estimates at that time for 2021. And with that, that concludes our budget presentation. And if there's any, well, I believe we'll be opening it up to the public for comments, through your worship.
Yes, thanks, Mike, and thank you to staff for that extensive presentation tonight. Lots of information in there, and it's certainly an excellent position to be starting from. Before I go to the public, though, I will just ask council if there are any questions or comments relating to that last portion of the presentation. And I see two. So I'll start with Councillor Doherty, and then I have Councillor McLeod as well.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to the CAO. The $60,000 that is free right now within our 2% cap, was that for operating, or was that for operating and capital as you have presented here?
CAO.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Doherty, that is for both, although, yeah. that certain projects have been noted to have access to other funds. So, for example, the gas tax notes.
So, and just as a follow-up, Your Worship, so if that's the case, if we know that there are certain projects that can be funded from other grants, can we just take those out of the list? Just to simplify things.
CAO.
Thank you, through you. We could take them out of the list, but I think it's very important for council to indicate that these in fact are pieces of work that you think should go forward and are important to you. All of them do involve some staff time, some of them more than others. Some are simply a purchase of a lift gate or something. And while we don't know exactly what they would displace, they will eventually displace some other work that we could have done, for example, with the gas tax funding or one of the other funds. So should council wish it, we could certainly say, yes, you want all those other items and simply take them out. But I think it would be important for council to say, these are important to me. They're a priority for the community. Please do them.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. I just have a couple of points of clarification for just to solid things into my head. And so my first two are for Treasurer Switzer. So in the towards the end of the slides, you were talking about how we're putting $2 million under the plan as presented with the 2% $34 million budget. $2 million into reserves. And then if we want to have some of these service enhancements, we would be dipping into an additional 569,000. So if we do none of those, does that go on top of the 2 million that we're putting into reserves?
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Through your worship, to Councillor McLeod. And just for a point of clarification, the 2 million would be going to reserves and reserve funds, and I just wanted to make that difference. But you are correct that the 2 million is included in the base, and then on top of that, there's the additional 569,000 that should council not proceed with, using that towards the service enhancements that CAO Skinner went through. That would bring the total up to just over 2.5 million going to reserves and reserve funds.
Thank you. My second question for the treasurer, through you, Your Worship. I just wanted to hear this again at the beginning of the presentation. You said we're having a 5.6% population growth increase in town during the course of 2020, and this budget sets out 3.6% staff growth. Did I hear those correctly? I can't read my own handwriting. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Through your worship, those are the estimated population growth that we have for the town of Collingwood, which is, again, as I mentioned, I'll just grab my notes here to make sure I'm giving you the right information. Yes, our estimate is 5.3% population growth in 2021. That's our estimate. And the proposed budget scenario that we've gone through here is adding the 8.32 full-time equivalents, which represents a 3.6% increase from last year to this year. Does that address your question?
That's exactly the numbers that I wanted to be sure that I could read. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, to CIO Skinner. The very last item on the service enhancements slide that you showed us was about the $50,000 feasibility study for the Arts and Culture Center. And I'm looking at last year's budget, and we budgeted $50,000 for it then. Did I miss something? Did we not spend it? Or did you clarify that? And I was looking elsewhere. I apologize if you did. And I was writing notes that I can't read. Through you, Mr. Mayor.
CAO.
Thank you very much. Yes, we did budget money for it in 2020 this year. And we did proceed to tender the contract, and it's in its final throes of being awarded. And while under our reserves and reserve fund policies, typically we don't earmark money for something in particular. In the case of this study, it is our intention, and we have not done it yet, it is our intention in the next week or two to bring forward a very specific report about that funding, to just put it in a reserve and use it in 2021 specifically for this purpose. So I hope that clarifies things. So let me, in another word, the taxpayer paid for it this year in 2020, and we can want to continue to use that 2020 money with council's approval to deliver the rest of the study in 2021.
We're getting some confused looks. But I think maybe it goes to the fact that it was in reserves and we don't automatically carry the reserve forward, I think. Is that the answer to that? I think if we're talking about the same money, it's an accounting issue, I think, in some respects. So maybe I'll let someone who can speak that language better than I answer that question for the clarification.
Oh, through your worship, yes. The issue that we're running into is the actual expense would be recognized in 2021. We've issued the PO, but due to our reporting requirements, those funds would be recognized in 2021. And therefore, if we were to include this again, to come from taxes, we would essentially be raising the funds for that project twice. So what the report that will be coming forward will be saying, we've raised the funds for this, we've gone out to market, and the project is going to be issued, or the tender, sorry, is going to be issued at the end of 2020. But from an accounting standpoint, if we were to recognize, we have to recognize that when we get invoiced. So it would be recognized in 2021. And by not including the funding for that from taxes, we would essentially have a project in 2021 that did not have sufficient funding. So the report that will be coming forward next week will essentially say we're taking those funds that have been raised from taxes in 2020, moving them into a reserve at the end of 2020 to fund this project that, from an accounting standpoint, will be recognized in 2021. I hope that clarifies it.
I think it did. Thank you. I think I got there just in the last 6 seconds of your explanation. Thank you very much. That's the extent of my questions for today.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McLeod. And I think Councillor Hamlin, in and out of her technical difficulties, had a question relating to the PRC and the HVAC contracts contract for the maintenance of all the HVACs at the PRC facility. So I will provide Councillor Hamlin if you want to ask that question now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really just had a comment because I have observed in reading during this COVID time that HVAC systems are being tuned to be more helpful in eliminating airflow issues relating to the spread of COVID. So I just really wanted to add the thought to staff, if they're doing maintenance on HVAC in our rec facilities, to perhaps give some thought to some of the work that's being done on that front. Also, I have a few questions arising out of this last bit, if now would be a good time to ask them.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the affordable housing amount that is proposed to by staff, I guess, is option one. I want to offer my thought that if we don't know what we really need by way of attainable or affordable housing, in terms of what value of housing, price level for rentals or purchasing, or what population needs to be accommodated and what age groups and so on, and all the myriad details that go into that. we won't know where to start. And I know that this is an issue across the country. Every community, some more than others, are dealing with affordable housing issues. And I noticed in the budget, well, it wasn't really a budget, but anyway, fiscal update that the federal government gave this week, they mentioned that starting in 21-22, an additional $12 billion is proposed for the rental construction financing initiative to support new lending over 7 years, which includes municipalities. So really, it just got me thinking that maybe there's going to be some more there will be some senior levels of government funding that if we're going to be able to take advantage of it, we should know what our needs are. And in terms of how we do this, I wanted to leave for thoughts for today that we consider an idea to have an affordable housing task force that would be assisted by a consultant. And it was suggested to me today that the $75,000 that we put aside in our budget for 2020 for the Out of the Cold program, in fact, wasn't utilized by them this year because they had other funding that came to them because of COVID. And I thought if those funds were available, that would go a long way to getting a consultant lined up to help crunch numbers for any affordable housing task force. So I just wanted to put that on the table for tonight so we can think about it. And then the last matter I wanted to raise has to do with, I'm going to call it the use of our streets. And I wanted to start with traffic calming because this was a matter that I originally brought before council, I would say about 1.5 years ago, by way of a Safe Streets initiative that council unanimously supported. And the idea was on appropriate streets that we allow them to be used for children's play with all the safety protocols put in place and so on. And there was huge interest from families in our community about that. And then nothing happened with it. And eventually, notwithstanding, I guess because maybe it never got into a budget. And then eventually staff suggested that it would be put into a traffic calming study and be dealt with then. In the meantime, we have had lots of residents on different streets in our community complaining about the speeding of traffic through those streets and the need for traffic calming. And I really wanted to, again, leave council with the thought for this evening that if we should be doing anything, it's listening to our residents who are seemingly quite interested in having traffic calming measures and maybe seeing what we can do about that under the optional service enhancements. And then on that same theme, and this is my last thought on this, I really wanted to speak in favor of active transportation. And I noticed tonight in the presentation that 6th Street will have to be dug up and repaved because they're doing a major water main replacement project, and that Peel Street's being reconstructed. And although John mentioned that there would be some, and I have to confess, I didn't quite understand his explanation, but some shared bike lane. I really hope that maybe we could give some thought to taking these perfect opportunities when roads are going to be dug up to put in separated bike lanes and start really giving some meat to our needs of our residents who want to travel around our community on bikes in a safe fashion. So those are all my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. And certainly if you put interesting concepts on the table and if you want to fashion those into motions for next week when we get to the discussion on the budget amounts, then that would be a good time to do that. And to follow up on the affordable housing piece, the $75,000 was used by the Out of the Cold program, so it's not left unused. And but certainly there's, I think, a bigger opportunity for us to look at other affordable and attainable housing strategies in our community. We've seen it through the UN. We've been in conversation with CMHC, and we've been approached by a number of private developers. So I think there's a lot of room for discussion there.
Okay, thank you. I will prepare some motions. That's good advice.
Council, any other questions or comments before I open up to the public who have been very patient? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I just wanted to ask the CAO and staff perhaps to elaborate as to how they arrived at the value of $50,000 for a part-time specialist. And I'm asking the question in the context of that I am initially supportive of this idea, but knowing that the green energy and the environmental opportunities from an employment standpoint are growing, and that those of expertise are in high demand. I guess question one is $50,000 enough to be able to actually hire somebody? And two, if not, would $50,000 be able to retain services maybe through a consulting firm as opposed to an actual individual? And three is that this is, I think there was reference to perhaps a 3-year plan. Maybe it's not feasible in year 1, but in year 2 and 3, that this would be an opportunity to approach our neighbors to the west, to the south, and the east, and see if they would be interested in participating from a funding standpoint, but also to utilize the resources to look at how what we're doing here is impacting there and vice versa, because the issue is regional and it's not specific to Collingwood. And then I have a follow-up, if I may, after that.
CAO Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Deputy Mayor Hull. Yes, the $50,000 amount is for a half-time person. So when we looked at a mid-level skilled person with benefits and a number of things that the part-time probably wouldn't get, it came out to around $111,000 per year. So when removing some of those, we thought $50,000 was reasonable for half-time. And I think it would be possible to in lieu of a staff person or a half-time person to retain a consulting firm instead. That could be viable. However, our vision for the position is that it be someone that truly has this expertise and has this expertise already. So not a technician that's coming from nothing, but that has a background and a degree related to climate change already. So that's the way that I would prefer to go, but there's no reason that we couldn't do a consulting firm as an alternative. It's not a make it or break it decision. And I like the idea of, particularly as we get our feet under us and start the work, should council dictate we do so, of approaching our other local municipalities in the area and potentially even the county level. I think we all have the same challenges in this field. Thank you.
Follow up, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. A couple of other things. This is somewhat unrelated, but it'd be interesting to see. I'd love to see just an Excel spreadsheet of all of the dollars that are leaving the town of Collingwood. And I'm not saying this in a negative, to go to various programs. So Southern Georgian Bay Tourism, for example, or South Georgian Bay Tourism. And then what the comparative dollars are from the other municipalities. I'd love to have them all listed so that I could see black and white what's Collingwood putting in, what's Town of Blue Mountains, Clearview, Grey Highlands, Meaford, Wasaga Beach, etc. And just to see which programs maybe we truly are getting value for our money, and maybe which programs we should be really giving us a second sober thought. And I stumbled there myself when I said Southern and South. At some point, I would love to see that we as a region get our act together and we pick one. Let's go with one name, Southern or South. I digress. Anyway, but I just wanted to ask very specifically the two questions or two issues related to Central Park and the sound system at Eddie Bush. So not a decade ago, we upgraded the sound system at Eddie Bush for, I think it was about, I don't know, 12,000 or something of that nature, give or take. And now it's 90,000. Is that 90,000 that the town is investing, or is that 90,000 with, say, an additional X number of dollars that the primary tenant or user of that facility would be looking at? So in other words, is the project really 150,000? And then as it relates to the acoustic facility at Central Park, I couldn't agree more. For anybody who hasn't been there, of my fellow councillors, it's a horrible, horrible facility in terms of that room. And I'd love to know what the rationale is of repairing that. Is it because we're actually going to use it? We're going to use the kitchen that's there, if anybody even knows that there's a kitchen. And what's the return? Why would we want to even, what is the rationale for spending that kind of money on that facility? Thank you.
Executive Director.
Yeah, so the first question, I was contemplating my answer to the second question. So the first question was, just give me one thing to remind me and I will catch up really quick.
The question about the sound system at the Eddie Bush.
Thank you. So the sound system, so the money that is being recommended there, or I guess proposed there, is the upgrade to the sound system in total. So it's not plus something else that we've had service provider come in, take a look and make that recommendation. So the $90,000 represents that upgrade. And what probably could be said is that the amount invested years ago or a few years ago in the sound system didn't contemplate a full building. It wasn't a fully equipped system for all purposes. It did a good job for minor hockey and for figure skating, but the upgrade that's required has a lot to do with the fact that the building's a lot more active and full now, well, pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, as a result of the junior tenant and other uses. So that sort of hopefully helps to understand where the $90,000 number comes from. Regarding Central Park, so there is a lack of community space, rentable community space in the community, which is why when Fisher Field project was being contemplated, one of the directions taken when we went after additional funding was to add in community space and try and leverage the needs of some social service groups who don't have a space to operate out of. So the upgrades there would make the room more usable, which is a need in the community. In terms of business case, in terms of cost benefit, we haven't done that yet because quite honestly, until it is working, we really wouldn't know how much more it would be used. We're basing the recommendation on the fact that we know that there is a dearth of available space in the community and that that improving it would give that space every opportunity to be used. It's a good size space. It does have some amenities that are valuable, but the acoustic quality of it really makes it unusable right now.
Deputy Mayor, does that answer your questions?
It does. And I just, in follow-up and reminder, the sound system was part of the budget that was presented last year, and we did not approve that. Is that correct? This is the second kick of the can? Okay, thank you. And I just, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I can't, in all good conscience, spend any more money on that facility over at Central Park in the way it currently is being operated. And that is not a slight on current staff. That is a damning of the way it was built in the first place.
Duly noted. All right, Council, are there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'll be quick. If anybody's as hungry as I am, I'll wrap it up. I know this is a time for council to go back and ruminate before we meet again. So I just want to share this thought as it pertains to the traffic calming implementation funding and the ability to consider funding for the crossing guards. And I just want to point out, I have like the last crossing guard study we did, and I think it might be helpful for council and staff to think about that within that crossing guard study, Burnside asked us to consider the potential to install traffic calming devices such as curb extensions, speed humps, medians, or islands, the potential to increase traffic enforcement, such as the implementation of speed or red light cameras, and the use of signage, traffic devices, or markings. To the point being that if we could potentially rethink the crossing guard funding, if we continue to be supportive, as Councillor Hamlin pointed out, of actually making funding available to implement some other traffic calming things. So I just wanted to share that thought before we get together again at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Council. Are there any other questions or comments? And before I open it up for the public? Seeing none, then Clerk Amos, if you could ask the public if anyone would like to comment and question or ask questions about the presentations we've received tonight.
Certainly, Your Worship. We have Matthew Pretty who would like to address the committee.
Okay, thank you. Matthew?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Matthew. So go ahead.
Alrighty. So in my mind, I'm thinking about some really good ideas I've heard, and I read on the document, the PDF, I went through it. Martin's group at Economic Development, they're doing a great job. That video the other night about promoting the downtown. Signage, I would like to see another wave of signage. The color I know is in contention, the blue. Those parking signs were great. And what was it? Along some of the sections of trails, there's some signs. I'd like to really see more welcome to Collingwood signs around the town. That would be fun. And more like historical signs. Those are really interesting. Those are a lot of fun. And animating the downtown more is always a good thing, historically and in a modern way. I would like to ask, okay, there's two things on my mind. Next year, we're going to see a lot of increased traffic again. The bathrooms are really important, putting those out in the park, maybe even adding more, having those regularly cleaned, finishing up like bike paths, widening a few of them. In Harborview Park, there needs to be a little more widening on some of the ones going up to the bridges. There's some S-bends and like just the usership there. It's, there's a fair group of people that are always going around. Maybe finishing a few parking lots that have potholes like Central Park. The paving that was done in Central Park is great on the path. Maybe expand it a bit in front of, like Mr. Deputy Mayor is saying, the facility's so, but so maybe the crushed gravel, let's fill it in with more paving so it's all linked, get it all smoothed out right up to like the gate of the curling club. And then as you go, that needs an updating in there. That parking lot needs a stronger finish. 6th Street stop sign's a bad one. There's people, oh my goodness, the volume of traffic at the 6th Street stop sign. I saw it this summer. I went for a drive at 10th line. That might need a light. I was wondering if John Vella could comment about paving of Harbor or Heritage Road. Could we do that this year? And what would it look like to have a boardwalk between Niagara and Courthouse, or should there be a sidewalk as stated in the letter about along the highway? Two questions for John there, please, and thank you.
I'm not sure if we still have Mr. Velick with us. I'll ask the clerk. Is John still with us? There he is. Hi, John. Did you hear those questions?
Yes, Your Worship, I did.
Okay.
I think the paving of Heritage, I think everyone agrees Heritage needs to be paved, but it needs to be looked at in more holistically with the servicing of the terminals and whatever is ultimately decided to do with the terminals. We would like to reconstruct Heritage Drive and install any servicing required at the same time. Sidewalk to Niagara, due to the high lake levels. We have money in the budget to install a new sidewalk next year along Huron Street. That's a very important link. As for a boardwalk behind the courthouse, I don't have any information on that. I don't have any information on that.
Okay, thank you, John.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And the town's doing really well, everyone. Maybe we could do little updates downtown on the loudspeakers. Like if we ever had to, like, I just hope this thing settles. The wind is always good. The new snow is great. All shout outs to Public Works. Always a good job. Paving and plowing. Oh my goodness. Roadways in general. Great work to everyone out there. And, yeah, we should focus on the medical aspect of this crisis. We should turn our attention to maybe getting back to that task force. Things are, we need to be careful. Over to you, Mayor Saunderson. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Have a good night. Sarah, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak?
We do have another attendee. If the individual wishes to speak, they can press the raise your hand feature. At this point in time, Your Worship, there is no further questions from the public.
All right. Okay, well, that concludes tonight. I think we do have public delegations, but I think we just had an excellent interaction with Matt, and so I think we've covered the topic then. So with that being said, I will look for a motion to adjourn, and thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. That was a productive meeting, and thank you again, staff, for all your hard work. Good night.
Right.